It's July 18th, 2022. This is Roqe. Hi there, welcome to episode 192 of Roqe
You struggled with that one.
The numbers are getting too high. After Sada Hashtod, I lose it. Sado Navado. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. Nice to be talking to you. I hope you're keeping well wherever you're tuning in from around the world. Hello to you from Toronto, Canada. Salam Dustan Aziz. Durud bar shoma. Sado Navado. Can you believe it? Merci.
Nah, I can't.
Happy midsummer, everybody out there. Is it? I mean, do you feel like it's summer? It is summer outside.
It definitely is summer outside.
But I feel like I've been in the studio maybe too much or something.
Probably, yeah.
I'm like, summer hasn't started. I was thinking summer hasn't started. Then I was looking and it's like fucking end of July or something, you know? Yeah. What's happening? Yeah. Hello, Groovy Shia.
Hi, Aziza.
Hello, Fabulous Keon.
Hi, Jian.
The Fabulous Keon. I hear that this Tirgan Tammuz festival that was happening over the last few days in Toronto, a big Persian festival, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but I hear you are being recognized and called the Fabulous Keon.
Yeah, that's right.
You see what I've done for you?
Yeah, yes, all thanks
I mean,
to
it's
you.
not, you're not that fabulous, quite
not
frankly.
That much.
And people are running around calling you the Fabulous Keon.
It's quite hilarious, actually.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I was there at one point when somebody was like, "Oh, are you the Fabulous Keon?"
That's a question.
I'm like, Jesus.
Is it you? Are you sure?
You're no ordinary Keon. This is a big show. It's our all killer, no filler summer of Monday only big shows, which we might continue forever because we're having a lot of fun with these big shows. Award-winning British poet, a legendary translator of everything from Hafez to the Shahnameh to My Uncle Napoleon, Daijun Napoleon, Dr. Dick Davis. Now, I have to say, we have three big guests on this show, and Dr. Dick Davis is going to be the last guest. So, you know, if you're listening to this right now, about an hour from now, don't zoom ahead, but do stick around because I'm so excited to talk to this man. He really is a legend, and if you, like me, if your only window into some of the great works of Iranian poetic history, the Hafez, the Shahnameh, of course in a more modern sense, My Uncle Napoleon, if your only window into those works is in English, it's more than likely, almost entirely likely, that you've been reading Dick Davis's words. You're reading his interpretation, his translation of Hafez. So I feel like I've read a lot of Dick Davis, and I know he has an amazing personal story of being this British kid who studied poetry, became a British poet, and then ends up going to Iran in, I guess, the early 70s, falling in love, staying in Iran, falling in love with the country and with his future life partner. And that's the rest is history. He has to leave after the revolution, but he devotes his life to Iranian works. This British man now living in the U.S. who is more of an advocate for Persian poetry than most Persians are. Dr. Dick Davis coming up. So excited to have him on the program. Faezeh Samaei is going to be in the Roqe studio. She is a young Iranian woman. I guess she's an Iranian Canadian now. She's been in Canada for a few years, who is burning up the internet as a fitness and health advocate. She's got amazing energy. She's also an engineer, of course.
Naturally.
She's a Persian. Yeah, it's like if she wasn't an engineer, we'd be disappointed. He's a great painter. Is he engineer? Yes, he is, Dad. Okay. Faezeh Samaei coming into the Roqe studio. She's got this massive following online. Hopefully she's not going to tell me what I can and can't eat. I feel like we're those people. I feel like it's like a condition I have. We keep booking people to come in and tell me to stop eating bread. You know. And on a less exciting or less fun subject, but certainly an important one, perhaps the most important one on this show. We're going to get midway through the show. We're going to talk about what you might have heard about, folks out there around the world might have heard about a new spate of arrests in Iran of prominent filmmakers.
Yeah.
This time, the great Jafar Panahi, Mohammad Rasulov, and as well Mustafa Al-Ahmad. As far as I know, the story is that Rasulov and Al-Ahmad they signed or they put out a statement simply saying, please don't detain or arrest or punish
Put
the
down
folks.
your gun.
Put down your guns. That's right. On the protesters during the Abadan situation last month. So they're just making a statement for which they were arrested. And then Jafar Panahi goes to appeal for them and say, please don't, please let these guys be free. So they arrested him, right? And I mean, it's funny and
Sad.
absurd at the same time. So on this program, we're going to have the award-winning Iranian-Canadian filmmaker and a man who was arrested himself. In fact, arrested himself 20 years ago with Jafar Panahi. Bobak Paomi coming up in midway through the show to talk about what he makes of this new, as I say, spate of arrests. And I know in the case of Jafar Panahi, who happens to be one of my favorite filmmakers in the world, Iranian or not, and a beautiful, really sweet man. I've had the occasion to interview him. This isn't the first time he's been arrested, right? I mean, it's like a revolving door. It's a Groundhog Day. I did an interview in 2010. I can't believe it's 12 years now, with Maziar Bahari about the arrest of Jafar Panahi at that point. And we're actually going to put a link to that in the description of our program if you want to hear that old interview. But one of the things I was thinking about, which I'm going to bring up with Babak Paomi, is with the frequency of these kinds of arrests, and we don't just see this with filmmakers, of course, but the situation, the vaziyat Iran in general, there comes a normalization of it in a sense where there's only so much we can be surprised.
Yes.
So you hear, and I was reflecting on this because it's actually big fucking news, that these award-winning filmmakers are being thrown in jail for doing nothing, I mean, try and imagine in any kind of way in the UK or in the US or something, they've taken Francis Ford Coppola and thrown him in jail because he made a statement about speech or something. I mean, it would just be outrageous.
Yes.
And here we are in this situation where people hear the news and kind of shake their heads, and then move along. because what are we supposed to do? But that's the part that gets really worrisome, scary for me, because when it's no longer shocking, it's when does quiescence or complacency just become enabling it? And I don't know what the answer is. I'm not suggesting storm the palace or whatever we're supposed to do, but that part is just so difficult. And every Iranian listening to this, every single Iranian listening to this gets exactly what I'm saying, that, Jafar Panahi's been arrested. Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's been normalized.
Okay. Yeah, it's
happens
and
so often.
something horrible happened yesterday and 3 days ago, and what are we supposed to do? But prominent filmmakers who've made these incredible works, who are in the some of the pride of the nation, being thrown in jail because they made a statement. About protecting others who may, I mean, it's just unbelievable. So Bobak Paomi coming up in a little bit. Looking forward to having him back on the program. Remember, if you're listening to us on a podcast platform, you can do so on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Instagram, CastBox. It's once a week now, also on YouTube. And then throughout the week, if you follow us on Instagram or social media, Telegram and YouTube, we're putting up different moments, video moments from our interviews, etc. as well. All of this can be found at roqemedia.com, our website, roqemedia.com. Hey, in a couple of weeks, our fun new travel/documentary video series, Talking to Persians, will be posted very soon. Do you want to see the fabulous Keon live in London? Or at least she was live at that point.
You just lost about 500.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. Maybe not the. I was going to say
Not the
Captain
selling
Reza,
point.
but that wouldn't help either. I will be on screen
There you go.
at the beginning of August with our first destination, which is London. We are going to be posting Talking to Persians London coming soon, featuring all kinds of interesting members of the London, England Persian community. We're pretty excited about this series. First stop, London. We'll let you know more about when it's coming out. Hey, a big thank you to Hamid Reza Safipour for helping to make this episode of Roqe get to your ears and eyes. Hamid Safipour, Luxury Custom Homes. Say the name Safipour, Keon.
Safipour.
There you go. You see?
It wasn't so hard.
Rhymes with luxury. If you're in the Toronto area or you're an Iranian Canadian, you may know the name Safipour. Hamid got his master's in civil engineering and got into the field of building and consulting on luxury homes over 3 decades ago. And in the last 20 years, Team Hamid and Nina have made the Safipour name one of the tops in the business. A name you can trust to buy your dream land and your dream house, build your dream house. Safipour Luxury Homes have now teamed up with Remax, and they're moving into also doing exotic high-rises that are beyond things we've seen in the Toronto area before. If you are thinking to buy or sell or build your dream house, Keon.
Okay, noted.
If you are anywhere near the Toronto area, Keon,
Again, noted.
and interested in buying, Shaya,
Yes.
get in touch with Safipour.
Of course.
Safipour.com, Safipour.com is where you go. Safipour.com. Thank you, sir. Hey, I mentioned that it was just the Tammuz Festival this last few days in Toronto, which is the placeholder name for the Tirgan Festival. Don't get me started on why there has to be so many names. But it's Tirgan, basically.
Right,
it was kind of, but it wasn't official Tirgan.
Yeah, they wanted to differentiate it because this was actually supposed to be the Nowruz festival, but because of COVID, they had to, rebrand it to something else.
So everybody was going, are you going to Tammuz? What? Tirgan? Oh, yeah, Tirgan.
Yeah.
So at this Tirgan Tammuz festival over the last few days in Toronto, if you're listening anywhere around the world, it's a big, I think it's one of the biggest in the world. The biggest.
Outside of Iran. Yeah.
It's a big arts and culture festival that happens biannually in Toronto, and there's a Nowruz version now and the summer versions, and there's really, really memorable performances have happened at this festival over the years. And what we thought we would do this week was send our roving reporter, the fabulous Keon, to the Tammuz Tirgan
Festival.
It's exhausting. How was your stint as our roving reporter?
It was so good, baby. And it was the first time I had been to a Persian event since COVID happened. So this is the first time in 2 years.
Really? You didn't go to a Nowruz thing?
There wasn't any Nowruz thing.
Yes, there
was
were.
there?
Yeah.
I mean, it was still COVID times, I think.
And you don't consider concerts and
Toronto.
things like that to be events?
Yeah, I guess there was, but not to this magnitude.
Right.
I mean,
Yes,
Tirgan
it was
is
the first big,
huge.
yeah.
Right. So it was just so good to interact with the community and, talk to
See
a
the
bunch
Persians.
of... Yeah, I met a lot of Roqe fans. It
Yes.
was so great to see people in
Yes,
in
it was
person.
really nice, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was great. Talked to a lot of people. The thing with Tirgan is it's run by the volunteers. There's hundreds of volunteers running this thing. And I always wondered, it's a lot of hard work. What makes them keep coming back? Because they're repeat volunteers. It's a family. I mean, a lot of these people immigrate to a new country, Canada, and they miss home. They're like, they miss the food, they miss the people. So to them, Tirgan is like a home away from home. And, there's something special about that.
The volunteer aspect is really, really remarkable. And this team, this Tirgan team, is such a community that I think, well, I know you remember, Keon, because you co-hosted it. When the Flight 752 tragedy happened, within a few days, there was this massive event that was put together. The Tirgan team and volunteers sprung into action and were able to put together this event because that infrastructure exists. It's
that
a really,
connective
really wonderful
tissue that
thing.
just brings everybody together.
They all know their jobs and they all do
Yeah.
that, and the volunteers are amazing. So I want to ask you. I must say, Shai, I went to a couple of the events at this the Tirgan, and of course it was great to see some great stuff. But every once in a while, I want to see how Keon's doing. Savvy Roham. I was like, I wonder how my young roving reporter is, and I would find her with like a cupcake, like a muffin or something. I'd be like, are you guys shooting this? And Roham with like some crumbs in his mouth. Oh yeah, we're. And then there'd be like, oh, there's Keon Roham, and she's got like some champagne or like wine or something. And I'm like, what are you guys? So I know Roham has assured me that you've shot some great stuff.
I mean, it's a festival. It's all part of the fun. It's hard work, let me tell you. Drinking champagne is not easy.
Yeah. So what did you? How about this? Because we're going to see this. We're going to put this up on our social media in the coming days on our YouTube and Instagram channels. Some of your the findings from the Tammuz Tirgan Festival. What's something you learned from roving around with a microphone?
Well, let me tell you, the biggest thing is the theme of the volunteers. Like, what keeps bringing you guys back to doing this? Because I see them stressed out and putting in so much hard work, and to them it's because they're so passionate about it, their culture, their art, their history. They want to showcase that to the public. That was the running theme.
Did you interviewed some of the volunteers?
Yeah, I did.
Nice.
And some of the people that came there, to them it's home, right? They're coming back to their home country.
What was your
in a way.
strangest reaction?
Oh, strangest reaction.
What was a strange reaction you got?
I can't say there was any.
right.
I mean,
Everybody
are you
was
expecting
on
something
their
shocking?
game? No, I just
yeah,
wanted to.
no. I mean, listen. There's always going to be a few strange characters in the Iranian community.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of
Most
strange
of them.
things
Yeah.
happening, but no, it was for the most part really
lovely.
positive
Lovely.
and beautiful. I got to see some amazing performances.
What did you love?
Rastok
Weren't they great?
Amazing. My God. It's one thing listening to them on the show, of course, in their music, but seeing them live is just
Amazing.
a performance of a lifetime.
It's really worth seeing. If you get a chance to see Rastok anywhere in the world, the great Iranian folkloric, they're not just a band. They're like ethnomusicologists, archaeologists. They're mining this Persian music history in terms of the stuff they play from different regions and different instruments, different sazes. And by the way, they came into the studio
that's right.
on Saturday, and so we recorded them in here, and we're gonna run that next week. And it was so great to see them. They're just they're also the sweetest people. I don't get this. How come? Well, there's something up with that band. They're so nice. They're so talented.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So Rastok was great, and we saw Fariba Davoudi, who is a very fine singer. She lives in Toronto now.
Yes, she's really amazing. Yeah.
And then last night, Babak Amini and Shaheen Najafi performing together. Now, for those who would find that sort of shocking, they did put out a song last year together, and Shaheen's been in Toronto, and so he got to know Babak, and they started working together. And the show was, I just thought it was amazing.
Wow.
I thought it was really, really, I'm a fan of both of these guys, but I really thought, here's what I thought. I mean, Shaheen Najafi, if you've seen him perform, he's a great performer. He is just, you don't want to take your eyes off him when he's on stage. He's a really interesting guy. He's got a very interesting, fertile mind, creative mind, and he's a great singer. So all of those things put together, and not to mention his lyrics, etc. But then Babak wasn't just the great guitarist on stage. He had done all these arrangements of the songs that they've written together, but also taking old Shaheen Najafi hits and songs and doing these arrangements with this amazing band that they had put together. And I sometimes forget how great an arranger Babak Amini is.
He's
I mean, he's a monster guitarist, but just like I was thinking, who comes up with that sax line and the little syncopated rhythms at times, and it was and it all was really complementary to what Shaheen, because Shaheen's style at first glance you would think it'd be very different from Bobak Paomi, but it worked together. Anyway, I thought it was a great show. It was really, and people went ape shit. People really enjoyed it.
No,
I'm not sure maybe they wouldn't describe it that way. They enjoyed it.
I have to say some of Bobak's composition for Gugush, they are like fabulous. They're amazing. He is really great. He's really great. He is legendary.
You sometimes forget because he's such a nice guy.
Yes.
And you know he's a great guitarist. But there's all this other stuff that... Anyway, there we go. Shout out to... See, now that, if I called him the fabulous Babak Paomi, that would kind of make sense. But it's the brand
you
is...
have a point.
But
Maybe
I can't change it. No. It's
well.
like TM, the fabulous Keon.
Well,
How do I change that?
That's unfortunate. I guess I'll just stay with it.
I think it's awesome that you were out there roving around, and you also did a great job at co-hosting the opening ceremony, and so we'll look forward to the fruits of your labor, Keon.
Why, thank you. A compliment from Jian.
Let's get to our first guest, who's coming into the studio. Here we go. My first guest today is a Toronto-based Iranian personal fitness trainer and the woman behind the extremely popular Instagram channels Faezeh Fitness and More Faezeh. On her platforms, Faezeh Samaei makes accessible little videos where she shares exercise routines, teaches fitness tips, and cooks healthy food. She was born and raised in Tehran. She graduated in textile engineering from Amir Kabir University. Then Faezeh moved to Canada in 2015 with the mission to pursue her passion of fitness, and ended up studying health promotion as well as a degree in kinesiology at Humber College. She is a growing star on the internet, but right now, Faezeh Samaei joins me live in the Roqe studio. Hello.
Hi.
Very nice to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Growing star on the internet.
Thank you.
A textile engineering degree. I mean, this is really, you really underscore the Iranian stereotype where no matter what we do, you have to have the engineering. I want to be a painter. That's okay. Just become an engineer first. I want to be a fitness coach. Just become an engineer first. Were you interested in textile engineering?
No, I wasn't. Like back in Iran, you don't have a choice. Like you just go through an exam and then based on your score, you end up somewhere. So that's where I ended up. Like it was not out of like passion for textile.
So is that a good score? I mean, textile engineering is pretty impressive stuff. Do you have to have a good score to go into that?
The university that I went to was a pretty good university. So it was. So I kind of had a good score. Like I wasn't like very on top, but it was good enough to get into that university.
There's fitness coaches. There's people who teach and help with health in Iran.
Yes. So
it's not like you didn't have that option, is it?
It's not like, here you Google and you find a place to go to like classes or whatever, or courses. At least when I grew up, there was nothing like that. Like you couldn't Google something. So you went through like the education system that they designed. Unless like you knew somebody. I never knew how. I always wanted to to be a trainer, to get into the fitness world. I never had the chance. But now that I look back, I realize why I went through it that way. Because I came to Canada because I went to the university. That's how. Because I came here as a student. I needed to apply and then come here to study master. So if I didn't go through that university and get that degree, I don't think I could come here.
Interesting. So ironically, the textile engineering did help you become a fitness coach.
Yes, I'm so thankful to that 4 years.
What is textile engineering?
It's about fabric and how it's made and clothes. The factory, the factory lines.
You're even bored talking about it.
I know.
It's really not your field.
In 2 seconds, I'll be done. That's how much I remember from it.
Your page, your Instagram channel, is really accessible and fun, but at the same time, it's clear. It's clear you know what you're doing, and you're really dedicating yourself to sharing your life. I mean, this is not just you in a gym. We see all sides of you, you at home, you with your cat, you cooking, you working out, obviously. And inside that, you lace in these tips and this fitness help. When did you decide that that's something you wanted to do, to share that much of yourself?
So I think I started 2016. Something happened in my personal life. I lost my boyfriend, and I was traumatized from the whole experience. I felt pretty lonely because it was literally my first year in Canada, and I was going to university. I couldn't hang out with my classmates. They were a little bit younger than me by a few years. I couldn't relate to them.
Meaning he died?
He died, yes.
Oh,
he
my
passed
God.
away from cancer, and I was in a very bad place, and I didn't have any friends, and I was way too shy to even make friends.
Was he somebody you had met in Iran?
No, I met him in university.
Oh,
so
in Canada?
In Canada. So we met first and second semester. We dated on second semester, and then halfway he diagnosed with cancer.
Oh my God.
And then he went to he was hospitalized, and then 7-8 months later he passed away. So, and after that, I had nobody to share that with. I didn't have a shoulder to cry on. I was pretty miserable.
Your family didn't move here. You moved here alone.
No, I had my family here.
They were here?
Yeah. They
so
were
you
my
had those
sister.
shoulders to cry on.
Kinda, yeah. But here everyone's busy with their life, and there's so much that you can share. At some point, you're I cannot just put too much on their plate. I have to deal with it on myself.
Jeez, what kind of cancer did he have? He was a young guy.
Leukemia. Yeah, he was just 24. He was just the fittest person I've ever met in my life. He was he had muscles, and muscles, yeah.
And you would know something about this. How does someone get leukemia at 24?
I don't know, to be honest. It was very unfortunate. Especially you don't expect someone that young and that fit.
No.
Something like this would happen. And he was the sweetest, kindest person.
And that would change your life. Something like that. I mean, for you, that's a heavy trip to go through.
Especially I was just 24, and it happened literally 1 year after my own dad died. So I lost two very important people in my life, literally close to each other. So I was already trying to heal from my dad passing, and then this happened.
You're in a new country. You're not.
I'm a new immigrant.
Yeah.
I'm still struggling speaking English.
So how did you deal with it?
Not in a good way. I think now that I look back, I realize I should have talked to somebody, therapist or someone. I didn't do that, and I don't think my family realized that maybe I needed someone to talk to. So I started doing Instagram because I just needed to talk. I just needed to talk to some people. Even not necessarily about what happened, just to talk, to share, to just distract myself. So that's how it happened. I started with one video, and then it all happened.
Wow. Yeah. It kind of turns it on its head, the idea that, because we hear so much about how our smartphones and social media and all of that is actually making us lonelier, and we're not connecting as much, but in some cases yours would be a case where it was actually a savior for you.
It did save me.
But you weren't posting about him.
No, back then I wouldn't share it with anybody.
I mean, I didn't even know this story, and you've done a number of interviews, but I haven't seen this before.
I think this is the first time I'm actually bringing I posted few things after 3-4 years of that when he passed away. I wasn't ready to even share, because I felt like a failure. After I know it had nothing to do with me failing, but back then I felt like that I am so traumatized and I wouldn't be able to date ever again and all that. So I didn't want that. I was ashamed that I went through such experience back then. Now,
why would you feel ashamed?
I'm not a healthy person. Mentally, if somebody finds out that I went through that experience, immediately they're gonna be okay, she must be broken inside or depressed or whatever. So I try to hide it so nobody know that inside of me what the things that are happening. There's
very few people. I don't know if there's anybody who isn't broken on some level inside because of something. So, but that's a major thing for you to go through in your mid-20s in a new country. So how did I mean, I feel I feel like I almost have to take a moment to think about that, because it's You must still think about him all the time.
I do, but not in a painful way anymore. Like I would get emotional, but I'm so grateful that I had that experience, that I met him, because he was my first friend before he was a boyfriend in Canada. Like I practiced English with him. He kind of took my hand through like the Canadian lifestyle. So I'm so grateful.
And you would have been around I certainly know what it's like to have been around somebody who has cancer and they're degenerating. You're seeing it every day.
Yes.
And that journey is...
It's pretty difficult, especially
horrific.
when someone from that, like a fit person, goes to that like a stage that they're just like so skinny and they cannot even like lift something like a glass, and then they end up in ICU. Like it's just that change, like in 8 months, that's a lot to process.
You must have at some point thought, I'm not going to get over this. I'm not going to be able to move on.
God, yes. But you do. Like I never thought I would, but you do move on.
So how did the fitness help you? I mean, how did that, is that what you were doing on Instagram? How did you first start feeling like this is healing? I'm talking and people are hearing me. What part of that was healing for you?
So you get like, I started posting videos and I talk and I get interaction from people. So now I have like these kind of friends that I talk to, and then I see that they're giving me attention, because I had nobody that I would talk and then they would talk back with me, like back in university. Not that there were nobody to talk to. I was so shy, especially like I was not comfortable in my English skills. So
you're not shy at all on camera.
When I'm alone with my own phone, like that's a different story.
It's so interesting because you're very comfortable. I mean, that's one of the things that makes you, I think that's the story of the 21st century. People who are comfortable on camera. I mean, you versus those who aren't, because you sort of win that part of the internet, because somebody who's comfortable in their own skin makes the viewer feel comfortable. And that's certainly the case with you. I imagined that you were somebody who was never shy and was probably, on videotape since you were a little kid or something.
No. Like I was the shyest person ever. To this day, I would still identify myself as a shy person, but I try like not to show it as much.
But that's so interesting to me. How does somebody who identifies as shy exhibit such confidence on video and show their house and you're not shy about even showing you, and you're sweaty and in the middle of a workout. I mean, there's some people who won't turn on the camera without putting full makeup on or something.
That's like I don't mind showing it when nobody's like, I like to take the video. I don't mind posting, but if there are real people around me, like with like real human beings around me, then I get shy.
Right. But not the 250,000 people who watch the video.
No, it's okay. They can watch it.
That's quite funny, isn't it? Yes. If that feels somehow less intrusive than if somebody's in the room.
Yeah.
So you, that must have been, given that you identify as shy, you start making these videos, and what was the point where you start thinking, I can marry this with my fitness and my passion?
Because I was studying fitness, and I was so passionate in like the whole fitness world, and so I would go to class, I would learn something, I would go to the gym and make a video of things that I was learning in class. So it kind of helped me to study too. So I was like using my education to create content on Instagram. That's how it kind of merged together and like got me to this point.
You've said something about being a kid back in Iran in middle school or something, and being kind of topoli or something, where you are like you had put on some weight or something, and that was the moment where you decided you wanted to get into fitness. Is that the story?
So like I come from a family that we have the gene to gain weight. So growing up, and I'm the last kid, and growing up, I always hear these conversations from like women around me that, I gained weight, like I don't feel confident about my body, this and that. So I always had the fear that this is where I'm gonna end up. And I realized if I don't want to end up like where these women end up, so I should start working out. So that was the initial thing that got me into the whole fitness world.
And you knew that you were good at it. I mean, you've also talked about the fact that you're not great at sports, like team sports, at all.
No.
Which is interesting because to watch you on your videos, you're obviously extremely fit. You have endurance. You're strong. Tell me about the delta or the difference between individual and team sports for you.
I think sports is all about competition, and I didn't grow up like being in a household that even like there's this person who's like part of the sport world, and I never felt confident to compete against anybody. And that's why I loved gym. That's why I love lifting weights, because there's no competition. It's just you with the weights. And then you just get the stronger on your own. There's nothing to compete with. So I don't...
Competing against yourself, I suppose.
Kinda, yeah. That's okay. But not against somebody, because like if like it's when there's someone else and you're trying to compete. You know, some people have it in them. Like it's just so...
You're not that way?
No, I'm not.
You don't want to be number one?
No. No.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, why not?
It's not in me. You know what I mean? Maybe because growing up, nobody told me that I have to be number one, or nobody put me in a situation that I have to compete.
Everybody who comes on this show says, "Oh, my parents told me I have to be number one." So
no, nobody expected anything of me growing up. Nothing.
So if somebody says, "Oh, I know my friend Faezeh, she's a much better trainer than you. She's number one, you're number two," it doesn't bother you?
No. I'll be like, I'm pretty sure she has a great style, but doesn't mean that she's better than me. Like, she has her style, I have my style.
That's amazing.
It's just like, it's okay. Like,
so you think that to be, say, a good basketball player or a football player, there needs to be some element of aspiring competition in you, and you don't have that.
That's the fire that would get you get you work harder.
So what's the fire that makes you do 100 reps or squats or something like that then? I mean, what's the incentive?
It's super fun. The feeling I get during the workout, it's like you're getting high. Literally, naturally, you're getting high. So when I work out, I'm seeking that feeling that's would come like within 15 minutes when I start working out. So that's what I'm looking for, because that's like a drug that my body makes that like fades away all the anxiety, all the stress, all the like helps me gain more, like be more confident, be a better person, like all that. Like that's what I want from my workout. Not to be number one in any sense.
I mean, the competitive thing has thrown me for a bit of a loop, because what I was thinking when you talked about, or when I knew that you weren't as interested in sports and team sports, I wondered to a certain extent if that's a socialized Iranian thing, because Iranians, at least on a big national level, and before everybody writes in, I know we have a good volleyball team, or Team Melli does okay once in a while, but team sports are not really what Iranians are known for. I mean, certainly when it comes to the Olympics, it's always like one guy weightlifting or a woman in karate or something like that. It's never a team kind of sport. And I've heard from friends of mine who grew up in Iran that there are team sports, but it's not as encouraged, especially amongst women, as individual sports. Do you think that there's something in that?
It could be. Yeah, you're not encouraged to participate in any type of sport in general, unless like you're in a school. Some schools they encourage it. Like the way I grew up, the community that I was involved in, it was not a thing. Like I grew up with people who would say, "Oh, she lifts too much weight. She wouldn't be able to get pregnant later on." Like all those like the stereotypes about lifting weights.
Right.
So that plays a huge role. Like you're brainwashed for like all those stuff. So later on in your life, it's hard to kind of like reprogram yourself.
I have to imagine a lot of the people watching you are in Iran. I mean, you speak in Persian on your. So, what do they tell you about what you're doing and how you inspire them?
I generally get a lot of like good comments about like that. It's very inspiring to see somebody who make this like fitness like their whole life is all about fitness. I also get people who would call me that like I'm not feminine anymore. Like I don't look like I look like a man. Like I lost all my feminine side and all that. So I get both, but mostly like positive comments.
I've lost my phone inside. Is that's silly for somebody to say that, but how does that make you feel?
Before, like maybe like 2 years ago, it would get under my skin, or like I would be like, have I? Like I would second guess it. But now, like that feeling that I like, even if I have, to be honest, I don't care. Like, sure, I look like a man. The way I feel after my workout, I don't care. Because at the end of the day, when you sleep, you want to sleep well. You don't want to have a stress. You don't want to have anxiety. And if there's something that helps me in a very healthy way not to have anxiety, I'm going to do it, even if I end up looking like a man.
And is that the case that is part of the reason you do what you do, the sort of undermining anxiety, getting rid of stress and anxiety? Is that what it does for you?
That's one of the top reasons, yes. The stress, the
Meaning
anxiety.
If you weren't working out, you usually have anxiety?
I do, yeah, on a daily basis. Things happen, like life happens. Sometimes it could be just like a normal stress. Sometimes it can escalate to like an anxiety. But when I work out, it goes away.
It's interesting that you talk about how working out and fitness just is such a great feeling for you, because one of the things you said, which I inevitably needed to get to, because it's so interesting to have you on the show, because just recently in the last couple of months, we've had a couple of sort of fitness people / doctors who teach nutrition or preach nutrition, etc. And so we've been talking about health quite a bit, and I've been worrying about how much Persian food I can eat. But one of the things that you've said is you don't believe that people should go to the gym if the intention is to lose weight, or that's not what sort of working out should be for. And that's so interesting to me. I want you to tell me about that, because I really think most of the people I know who go to the gym are partly doing it to keep their weight down or to be slim.
Yes.
So what are we doing wrong with that?
I mean, that's how I got into it in the first place, but that's not something that you can use to forever. Like, that's not a good reason to go to the gym. Like, to begin with, yeah, it's good like to go to the gym, like to lose weight. But when you go, you have to educate yourself, or your trainer has to educate you that there's so much more that you are getting out of working out, that losing weight should not be your top reason. Because when you start, it takes a while for you to see results if you want to do it in like a healthy way. So if that's your number one reason and you keep looking at the scale and then you don't see the result, you're going to lose your motivation. And when you lose your motivation, you're going to stop going. When you stop going, all those amazing things that you can get from working out, you're going to lose all of those stuff. So even with my clients, maybe that's not a good thing to do in business. But I always like, losing weight is I never say it. I never tell my client you need to lose weight. I always ask them, how do you feel? How do you sleep? Do you think like you have more control over your appetite? How's your stress? Like, do you feel like you have more energy through the day? Do you feel like those are the things I try to point out for them to see that there's so much more you are getting out of this. It's not just
so if somebody says, I really want to lose 10 pounds, your prescription is not go on the elliptical machine an hour each day or something. I'm asking you, if somebody wants to lose weight, you don't believe that the answer is to say, okay, go on the treadmill or go on the elliptical and spend an hour doing that each day.
You would lose weight, but the key is in consistency. Like, it's not that, if I go like 1 week, if I work out like, and people do that, they go to gym 3-4 hours, they might drop the weight, but it would go back up like immediately. So I try to show them, like, I would not work with somebody if that's like how they want to do it. Like, in 2 months they want to lose 10 pounds. I'm like, I don't do that. Like, you have to wait, you have to give it, this is like my sentence I tell to people, you have to give it, you have to invest in it for at least 6 months to start seeing results. It wouldn't come in a month. If it comes in a month, like, I would be a little bit like cautious of what's happening.
Really?
Here.
Just for 10 pounds?
Yeah, like, I don't like it that way, because I've seen so many people that they told me stories. Yeah, I went on this diet, I lost 25 kilograms. I did this, I did that workout. And I'm like, then why are you here? Like, in my head, I would say. But they gain it all back. So what's the point? Like, for myself, I lost a lot of weight and I kept it off all these years because I went slowly about it. And now I eat a lot of food. even sometimes like I eat a lot of junk food, but I don't gain weight.
Wow, that's great. So you're not somebody, you're okay with, well, let me get to food in a second. I'm going to ask you about food. But there is something I always want to ask personal trainers this, or fitness people this, which is that when you do a strenuous workout, when I do a strenuous workout, then I want to eat.
Yeah.
It's usually when I'm not working out that I'm able to eat less. So am I undermining my results by eating a lot after I work out?
What are you eating?
Well,
I mean, eating.
Is this thing? Are we on? Are the microphones on? A baked piece of chicken.
For sure,
Some broccoli and some steamed. No, I eat. I actually don't eat that badly. I always joke about the fact that I eat badly, but I don't. But I don't. I eat a lot.
Yes.
And I sometimes eat junk food. Like, by which I mean fast food.
Fast food. Like
Pizza,
how often?
3 times a day. No. No, 2 times a week, 3 times a week.
That's a
lot. It's a lot. No, I know it is. Yeah.
Yes.
I like hamburgers and things.
I know. I mean, like I eat like a lot of junk food too, but on occasions. Like I went to a vacation and I was like, I had whatever I wanted. Ice cream, gelato.
Did you work out on vacation?
No, I walked a lot,
which
helped a lot. I didn't gain weight, even though I ate a lot. But now that I'm back to my routine. So I try to enjoy junk food or like high calorie food when there's like an occasion. Like if I'm in Italy, I'm not gonna go on a diet. Like I'm gonna eat as many pizzas as I can, just stuff myself in. But now that I'm back to my like routine, I'm gonna go back to my routine. Like, and I'll try not to cheat.
And you are somebody, I know this because I watched you on video cooking. You eat meat, red meat.
Yes.
You're okay with that?
Like I eat a lot of protein because that's good for getting a stronger, building muscles, and also like for weight loss. But generally eating a lot of meat, it's not healthy. So if you want to have a healthy diet, you should not eat a lot.
So how often do you eat red meat?
Every day. Red meat? Yeah. Not every single day, but like.
But you eat meat every day?
Yes, like all sort of meat.
So you're not one of those people who say, well, you could get that, substitute that with this and that.
You can, like there are beans, there are like all those stuff, like, but you get bloated when you eat all of those stuff, and I don't like the feeling. But there is a healthy way of eating protein for sure.
And how do we feel about dairy?
I went off dairy for a few years ago. I tried to be vegan for a while, and then as part of that, I went off of dairy. Now I only have like yogurt, because yogurt is actually good for you because of the probiotics and stuff. I have like a little bit of a cream in my coffee, but generally I don't have like milk and stuff.
No panina in the morning.
No, I mean, if I'm trying to go all Persian, I would.
Well, try to go. We are Persian. I try to go all Persian. This inevitably we get to the point in the interview when I'm just hoping to find somebody who will go, "Of course, Nuna panina is great for you," and then they would look at me in shock. No, who eats that?
I like to start my day with protein and like eggs and stuff. Sometimes even chicken.
Eggs and chicken. Well, I was going to say, what besides eggs? What do you eat in the morning?
Like I have like these special type of bread. I wouldn't call them special, like very healthy breads, like they're called sprouted toast. I get them and they're very
sprouted
good.
toast.
Sprouted, yes.
Okay.
I might say the name wrong. It's sprouted, like the thing.
What's it made of?
The wheat and stuff. But
it is
the
wheat.
It's
bread.
It's bread, but the wheat is sprouted. Okay. So I listened to a lot of podcasts that they said that this is a healthier version of bread, and I have that with protein always. No rice.
And no cheese.
No, I don't buy those stuff unless somebody brings it to my house.
I don't buy it, meaning if you did buy it, if it was sitting in the fridge, you might use it?
Yes, like if there is junk food, I would eat it. So I try not, like when I go
to just not put it in the cupboard.
Yes, I try to keep a very clean cupboard. Fridge. Yeah. I even try not.
I guess I should try that. Maybe that'll help.
Yes, because if it's there, I'll eat it. Like if you give me a bag of chips like this,
you would eat it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like that's why I don't buy it.
So you're human, like the rest of us. It's
Yes.
not. It's not. I'm not the only person that has trouble with that. It's true. I keep all of those things in my cupboard, and then once in a while, it's like, oh,
No,
it's
if
there.
it's there,
I mean,
you
I don't want
would
it to go bad.
Don't buy it.
Do you, when you post videos of, say, with red meat, etc., since you have such a large audience, I mean, some of these videos have 250,000 views, etc. Are there people who say you're a fitness person? Why are you preaching meat, or why are you using some of these things? I mean, do you get that kind of criticism?
I get vegan people to kind of criticizing me on like, oh, these are animals, like why are you doing this and that, which I understand their point, but it's their point, so not mine.
It doesn't stop you.
No, it doesn't, not for now.
What's the key to being a great personal trainer?
So your skills, honestly, training people, like giving people exercises is so easy. Like, it's just, there's not much to it. What comes down to it is how you communicate with people. Like, a squat is a squat. You can teach a squat. Like, anybody can teach a squat. There's nothing like so like anything special about it. But how you teach somebody a squat, how you my English is kind of like, it's about how you communicate to people, with people. That, like, I think most of my clients, they liked me and they kept working with me because of the relationship we started having, and not necessarily about the exercises. Like, I try to make things fun. I try to change things. I try to give them an experience every time they come in. But it's not about like a squat or lunges, and like, those are the very easy parts of being a trainer. Being a trainer is like, for 1 hour, you're their best friend, and they have to trust you, they have to love you, and so that they can accept whatever you're asking them to do.
And you believe people should have a personal trainer, obviously.
Yes.
It's always been my experience that I never work out alone the way I do if I have a personal trainer.
Right?
They always push me to a place that I wouldn't normally go.
Exactly.
But it's expensive.
It is very expensive.
Yeah. I mean, who can afford to hire somebody
It's
a few times a week to...
I know. It's very expensive to be a trainer too, because I'm like, my hourly rate might sound high, but the number of hours I can work and like my job security and everything is like, it's very risky to be a trainer.
Right.
Like, I have to be open like 24/7 if I want to make very good money.
Right.
And it's very hard. Like, if I want to go on a vacation, I'm not going to make any money. If I get sick, I'm not going to make any money.
Right.
People cancel on you. Things happen. So it's very risky.
Right.
Even
if you're with a big club or something, they seldom pay big salaries. It's based on how many people you're training and all of that, right?
Yes. And most gyms, like, there are high-end ones, but most gyms, they would pay you a fraction of what they're making.
Right.
So you can never make like good money.
Is there a time limit on? I mean, I see there's older folks who are still personal trainers. Yeah. Do you worry about that? Do you worry that there's a best before date on how long you can do this?
I used to be like very worried about that part, that, oh my God, I don't want to be like 40 and I still like just a trainer.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't sound
That's
like...
going to be weird. I don't know what that's going to be like when I hit 40, but I'm with you. It's scary.
It's like, you just want to, like, your social status, you want it to kind of grow with you.
Okay.
You know, I don't want to be like just a trainer. So I have plans for that. Like,
we don't want to take anything away from people who are trainers, are you personal trainers.
Oh no, yeah, oh my God, yes.
50s, you know, they might be doing it
depends
on
how you
job.
do it.
Yeah.
It depends on how you do it. Like, no, there's no like expiry date on being a trainer. It's a fun job. It's a great job. But you have to kind of like add more to it. You have to like start having your own business. This is what my plan is. I want to make my training and my style, like, I want to make it into a brand. That's where I'm heading. So yeah.
What kind of a brand?
Like, I have this specific way that I train clients. The way I design the exercises, the way I design the workout, like the whole session. So I'm trying to make that into like a system. I already have it to a great extent. So I'm trying to make that into a brand so I can like teach other trainers this is a very great way to train people. Because I had great success. People would come, people have fun. And that's a very important thing when you're working with people who are like working moms, who are like doctors or lawyers. Their lifestyle is anything but fitness or like healthy life. So when they come to you, you want to give them like a great experience, that they would feel alive, they would feel like energetic. So the way I do it, I had great success. So I realized maybe if I can turn it into like a system and teach other people.
I don't see why you can't. You've got a big following already, and it's growing all the time, right?
That's the plan.
What's the biggest mistake that people make when it comes to fitness and wanting to exercise and going into this?
They stop. Yeah, that's the only mistake. I can't think of, like, I would say go try as many diets, not like in a sense that like go do crazy things, but just try different things. Go to kickboxing class, go to swimming, go to dancing, get a trainer, but don't stop. That's the only thing.
How many times should we work out a week? Every day?
Yeah, if you want to be physically active every day for sure, but like training, like workout sessions, 2 to 3 times is like very ideal, but you definitely want to be active, physically active, but like going for a walk, going for like dance classes or something every day.
Are your parents still back in Iran, or are they here?
My dad passed away.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry, yes.
And my mom is here, yes.
Your mom's here?
Yes.
And how does she feel about your growing internet stardom in the fitness world?
She's not a fan.
She's not a fan? I thought you were going to say she was really proud of me. And
if she could, she would take it and delete it.
Really? Yes. Why is she not a fan?
She's very religious. Yes. So it was a struggle to kind of do everything I do and have her blessing. So she doesn't like it. Like, she would always message me, delete this video.
Because you're, forgive me, I don't know a lot about religion. So I'm assuming she's Muslim. It's in Islam, right?
Yes.
And we can work out in Islam. That's not the problem.
Yeah.
It's
yeah,
right?
That's not the issue.
Being fit is not the problem. It's that you're showing too much skin.
Yes.
Yes.
That's the part she has a lot of problem with. But to be honest, that never stopped me. Like, I felt a little bit guilty about it, but I realized it makes me happy and I'm not doing anything wrong. So I kept doing it and no regret.
I'm sure on some level she's very proud and happy that you're...
She sure doesn't show it. I mean, she loves me. She would never.
There's always the
disown
textile
me.
engineering to go back to.
Yes.
It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
Say hi to your mom. Tell her we're proud of you. It's really fun to follow you, and it's exciting to see how things are going for you. And and by the way, you were saying earlier that you don't think your English is great. I mean, I can't believe you've only been here 5 or 6 years. Your English is immaculate.
Really? Yes. Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
It means a lot to me. Thank you.
Much better than my Persian. Merci. Merci که اومدی.
ممنون از شما که دعوتم کردید.
Bye. Faezeh Samaei is a Toronto-based Iranian personal fitness trainer and the woman behind the extremely popular Instagram channels called Faezeh Fitness and More Faezeh. Faezeh Samaei joined us in the Roqe studio today. Faezeh has exited the studio. The fabulous Keon has come back in, and the microphone on for Groovy Shaya.
Yeah.
She's impressive.
Yes, I appreciate her courage toward, because she said her mother, she's a little bit religious.
That threw me for a loop there at the end, because I thought... I just assume, you know, it's such a gimme question. It's like, what do your parents think? Oh, they're so proud of me. And she was like, yeah, she hates it. She wants me to quit. No, I'm sure she's proud of it. Nope. She's doesn't show that at all. Yeah.
I was going to say, how amazing that she turned such a sad time in her life into something so positive. You know, it takes a lot of courage and strength to, first of all, doing social media is not easy. I couldn't do what she does, 24/7. So
and she really opens herself up.
Right. So to go from such a low point in her life and just turn it into something positive and public,
I'm still
kudos.
marinating over what she just said, because what do you make of it? She seems like such a paradox that she basically said she's an introvert, but through Instagram, through social media, because I even said, how do you feel about opening yourself up? She said, well, I'm fine as long as it's me and the camera. Her posts have like 250,000 hits on them, but she's okay with that. But in person,
it's interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
It's like a lot of actors and actresses that are actually shy in person, but they say behind the camera they're comfortable because that's they're playing a part, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, that's an interesting.
And I'd say, like, don't you think you're sort of the inverse of that? I find you kind of shy on camera, but in person you're a personality.
I thought about that too. It's so funny how that works out.
And it's so interesting that again, I tend to, my reflex is always to be negative about social media. So to hear that Instagram was her lifeline, so interesting.
Yes.
What do you make of that, Shaya? You're not even on social media.
No, but I can get the being introvert, but in front of camera another person, because I think I am kind of like that. I think I am a shy person, but like on stage I am not shy. Right. I get.
But she's. It's not just on stage. I mean, I invite people to follow her because she's. It's really great. It's fun, inspiring stuff she does. But you see her messy bedroom. You see what she's looking like first thing in the morning. I mean, it's really expositional. I mean, she's exposing herself. It's amazing.
Definitely I cannot do that, to show my life.
But that's why you're not I'm kind of similar, and that's why we're not good at social media. I said in that, when I was saying to her a moment ago about in the 21st century, the people who are comfortable on camera win. I'm comfortable on camera, I guess, but not opening my private life,
showing behind like your personal
like my
life,
messy kitchen or whatever. I'm just like I hear my mother's voice. اینو گذاشتی توی اینستاگرام.
Oh man, that's the other. My mom would be all over it too, like delete it.
تمیز نکردی. It's just like it's at the end of the day, it's all about defying our mothers. The other thing is don't go to the gym if you just want to lose weight. I thought that was interesting. Do you disagree?
People go to the gym for different reasons. For me, it's kind of just the lifestyle. Like, it's more so for my mental well-being. It's like, yes, I need to lose weight.
But
get
you're the first
shape,
person
whatever.
like in the winter when you're like, I'm into the gym, I'm gaining weight.
Yeah,
that's your thing.
Like, I go there to lose weight.
Yeah,
of course. But part of it is also my mental health. Like for me, it's such I'd be miserable.
But I go to gym to gain weight, actually. I go to gym to gain weight, not to lose weight.
You don't seem to be gaining any weight, so you haven't been to the gym in a while.
Yes, but
but really,
back then
you go and then you get hungry and
yes, because I like now I was too skinny and I went to gym to gain weight
I think what she was saying is that if your only incentive is losing weight, you will lose interest. I think she said that, like, if you keep going to the gym only to lose weight, like it won't be it won't be a lifestyle that you're embracing.
Well, that goes with everything. You have to make it part of who you are, make it a lifestyle so you can continue doing it. But if you're only going to lose weight for by X date, at some point you're not gonna, the gym is not a part of who you are.
Yeah. Oh no, she said if you lose 10 pounds, what did she say, in a month or something like that?
Yeah, you'll gain it right back. And
she said that's not healthy. You're doing something wrong. She said that's not.
In a month? No, she said 2 months. Right?
2 months?
2 months, something like that. But
all I know is now I don't have to lose that weight, based on what she said. I love that she wasn't policing the diets too. She eats.
It's all about I can't say the word. Metabolism. God, I was like, how do you pronounce that word? Metabolism.
It's a tough, so you have very average word.
I just don't say it so often.
Right.
But that's the point. You have to build up your metabolism, so then your body on its own is going to be burning.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you to Faezeh, Samaei for coming in. Thanks to you guys for those comments. Before we get to the legendary Dr. Dick Davis, who's coming up, and as I said earlier, you don't want to miss this conversation because Dr. Davis, He's this award-winning British poet who has been the primary translator of everything from Hafez to Uncle Napoleon and into English over the years. And he has a very special relationship with Iran, where he lived and taught before the revolution. He joins me coming up. But first, we would be remiss if we did not deal with another sad, if not absurd, situation around human rights and free speech developing in Iran again. You may have heard about this. The Islamic Republic of Iran, in its latest crackdown on dissent, has arrested 3 prominent film directors, Jafar Panahi, Mohammad Rasulov, and Mustafa Al-Ahmad. So the story is that Rasulov, who's an award-winning director, was arrested along with his colleague Al-Ahmad for posting a statement on social media simply urging members of the Iranian security forces to lay down their weapons following protests over the Abadan building collapse last month, which, of course, killed over 40 people. Then the great director Jafar Panahi, who had gone to the prosecutor's office in Tehran last Monday evening to check on Rasulov, was also arrested by security forces. They all remain detained. And joining me to talk about this is a man who's no stranger to great filmmaking or being arrested in Iran for his work and opinions. Bobak Paomi is an award-winning Iranian-Canadian film director. He won the Silver Lion for Best Director at the Venice Film Festival in 2001, and he's currently finishing a new film that will get announced very soon. But first, Babak Paomi joins me from Aurora, Ontario today. Hello, sir.
Hello, Jian. Very good to be with you, and I hope you're having a wonderful time.
Thank you. Welcome back to Roqe, Babak Jana. Last week, you're the perfect person to speak about this because you wrote a piece in Kayhan Life about your own arrest almost 20 years ago and how events in Iran are like Groundhog Day, like nothing has changed, you say. What can you tell us about the details of this latest incident as you know them that involves your friends getting arrested again?
Well, not much beyond what is in the news. I am, of course, following closer than most. I'm in contact regularly with the folks on the ground there. Rasulov and Al-Ahmad were arrested on the 8th. Their homes were raided, and of course, it goes without saying how humiliating and vulgar such incidents are, where people are basically swarmed in their homes with their families there. And I can only imagine by first-hand experience, I could say, what this experience feels like for not only ourselves but our families and loved ones who have to witness such vulgarity. A couple of days later, along with several other filmmakers, Jafar goes to the judiciary offices to inquire about what's going on and also demand their immediate release as they should. And of course, Jafar doesn't make it out, and they arrest him and throw him in with the other 2 as well. So the details in terms of how it happened, as I mentioned, 2 of them were raided in their homes, and Jafar was arrested on site there when he was at their offices.
And the pretext of these arrests is this statement on social media. Is that a pretext, or is that something that's this statement really that threatening to this regime?
Well, no, it goes deeper than that, and I think that's just a recent example of it. In my view, the regime in Iran, and I hesitate to call it a government because it doesn't have the characteristics of a meaningful government. It's just basically a system that is based on lies, deceit, terror, persecution, and violence, and somehow they manage to sustain their own existence on that level. They have the biggest problem with the arts community. Artists by nature are not partisan or ideologically tainted, and they are confronting a system that is deeply ideological, borderline, if not outright fascist in my view. So the problem is much deeper than the statement. The problem is the fact that filmmakers who are working independently, who are not letting themselves be subjugated to a system of censorship and, if you like, ideological contamination through various means that has escalated over the years, they cannot tolerate them. I mean, the regime in Iran can maybe build factories or, control industry with their means and their full and outright control of the country's resources, but they cannot manufacture artists and art and culture. And that is the fundamental clash between the artist community and them. The most recent incident, if I may just bridge back to that, is many filmmakers and artists in the community inside Iran, they were basically disgusted by what is happening, where a building collapses, people are devastated, and instead of sending rescue forces, they send SWAT teams to suppress people who are protesting against the deep-rooted corruption in the country that results in buildings being built such that they will collapse. And the artists gathered together and issued a statement to the armed forces and the police organizations of the country, telling them to put their weapons down and not to use their weapons against their own people. A peaceful statement. And that is the last sort of incident that heightened the attention of the Iranian regime towards filmmakers.
So part of the sadness around something like this, Babak, is the feeling that nothing changes, that we don't see progress over time in the direction of a more open society. It's been 43 years, and it feels like Groundhog Day, as I said. Tell me on that note, I mean, just to kind of reflect on it, what happened with you and, in fact, Jafar Panahi together? You guys were together about 19 years ago.
Yeah, it was around early June of 2003. Jafar and I were running some errands in his car, in fact, in downtown Tehran. And he had parked the car somewhere, and we were walking back towards his car, and we were swarmed by several plainclothes agents. You can tell from their demeanor and the look on their faces that they're not the normal types. And Jafar and I think, were wondering each to ourselves which one of us is being arrested here. And I thought Jafar is being arrested. Within a matter of a few minutes, a big crowd gathered around there. Possibly some people recognized us. They separated us on the sidewalk, and before I know it, I was thrown in the back of a unmarked vehicle with two agents on either side and one sitting in the front who seemed to be a figure of authority. And the last thing I could remember is I looked back out the rear windshield of the car and saw Jafar struggling with the agents who were standing with him, and asking possibly where they're taking me. And that was the beginning of the end of my stay in Iran.
Right. You know, you actually make the case in this piece that you wrote last week that it's not just that nothing ever changes, but you believe that things have actually gotten worse today than 2 decades ago. And Babak, many people have seen this as part of a larger clampdown in recent weeks in Iran that isn't just about the arts community, as you said, the filmmakers, but is about general dissent in Iran and really trying to suppress something that's bubbling. Why now? Why do you think this is happening?
Well, I think things fluctuate. They have come to a head at the moment, but if you look at the 43-year-old history of the Islamic Republic regime, almost every 10 years something major has happened, and the people have had enough. But I think part of it is the the general population, the Iranian people are becoming more focused on what exactly the problem is.
Right.
That this regime under the current circumstances, in fact, in my view, no iteration of this regime with the mechanisms, the people in power, and the constitution of the Islamic Republic have no outlook towards any kind of improvement and reconciliation with the people. So it is something that every once in a while it peaks. Sometimes it peaks in the provinces, not in the central capital cities of the provinces, and sometimes it happens in major centers such as Tehran. We experienced that in 1988, we experienced that in 1998, and 2009, the what was famously called the Bloody November, where people were killed, shot in the head. Young people were just indiscriminately killed, and many, some reports say a few thousand have been arrested and nobody knows what their fate is. And now is another, if not a turning point, it is another climax in the confrontation between the Iranian people and the state that is ruling them and is abusing them and all the resources of that great, rich nation.
Can I ask you to reflect on when we hear news like this, the arrest of filmmakers? I don't know if we had you on the line yet, but I talked at the beginning of our show about just how normalized this has all become. We hear about someone like Jafar Panahi. By the way, I'm such a fan, and I've had the great fortune to interview him. We hear about Jafar Panahi being arrested, and there's this kind of sense in the Iranian community of shaking our heads, but we don't really react with the kind of shock that at this point that we might have if, I don't know, if Martin Scorsese was arrested by the CIA for having an opinion. You know, how do we fight the feeling of acceptance or complacency when such events happen with such tragic regularity in Iran?
It is a problem, and in fact, the Iranian regime has normalized corruption and violence to such an extent that if you look at videos of the streets of Tehran, people are agitated, and there is an extreme level of indignant behavior by the regime organizations, and I think it is a major problem that we have to look into. On the one hand, we also have to understand that the people in Iran are suffering economically, as well as their basic human rights in terms of basic freedoms that they enjoy, and they are overwhelmed. Every day something happens.
Right.
And the minority within the country who can afford to, or who have the resolve and the motivation and passion to not remain silent, as well as a lot of us who are outside of the country and have the means as well as the passion to speak out, we must do so. And part of it also has to do with how we engage with the international community, from institutions and organizations all the way up to the United Nations, to members of parliament in our localities, to talk with them, convey to them how serious this matter is, and help neutralize this normalization of violence and corruption. Because I feel like foreign governments, the international community, are narrowing down, and I wrote another piece recently about a strategy that the Western countries boast, being decoupling of issues, which I traced it back. I found a bug in the software, in the operating system of Western democracies, that I traced back to the Nixon era and his foreign policy doctrine to decouple issues in negotiations with authoritarian regimes. Let's talk about this one specific topic, be it nuclear or an oil deal or something, and forget about everything else. And I think that is a travesty. It is a fallacy that has devastated the Iranian people, the people of Syria, people of Iraq, Afghanistan. And I think the example of Russia blowing up in our face by attacking Ukraine is something that is a rude awakening to Western powers. And going back to what you said, I find it our duty to engage as people. Over the last 43 years, a few million Iranians live abroad, and a good chunk of them have become citizens of these countries. And we have to be proactive and be the voice of freedom, of human rights, of democracy for the Iranian people, and divorce ourselves, especially in the arts community, from ideological and partisan contamination of the discourse.
Well, that's a perfect segue to a final question to you, which is that the news came out today, or at least I saw it on a story that came out today, that the International Coalition for Filmmakers at Risk, the ICFT, this is an Amsterdam-based body set up in 2019 to support cinema professionals in danger, has just posted an open letter addressing this recent crackdown on Iran's filmmaking community, in which they say the international film community must speak up. So what do you hope to hear from the global filmmaking community, and who do you hope to hear it from?
First of all, I welcome this recent announcement and statement, and I've been myself playing my part in writing personally to organizations and individuals in the international film community to not only issue statements but also take action, do what we can and basically act to impress upon these people that they cannot persecute artists with impunity. And we have to, I think, resonate with the international coalition of filmmakers in danger, and bring together a coalition among film festivals, not by way of sanctions and sort of closing the doors on Iranian filmmakers, but opening the door and making sure that the governments, the international organizations throughout the world take action against these kinds of acts by the Iranian regime, and not just leave it to statements of sympathy and empathy, because what's happening on the ground there needs much more than that. Now, what are those things that we can do in order to translate those statements into action is something that I don't want to prescribe, but I'm sure that once we get together and maybe have a conference, have a meeting where we invite also politicians and other international organizations, we can come up with a list of effective means to isolate the Iranian state and protect and open the doors for Iranian artists. I think the details of that I have in mind doesn't lend itself to the time we have here, but I'm sure that putting our minds together, we can go beyond, and it is about time that we go beyond just statements.
Bobak Paomi, I know these issues are close to your heart, and those folks sitting in jail right now in Iran are not just Iranian citizens or great filmmakers, but they're your friends. And it's always energizing speaking to you. Thank you for doing this today.
Thank you very much for the time, and I wish you all the best. And hopefully very soon we'll hear Jafar, Al Ahmad, and Rasulov safely out and doing their work. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Babak Paomi, an award-winning Iranian-Canadian film director. We reached him in Aurora, Canada today. Well, if you want to learn about Persian literature and poetry, one of the most esteemed and best-known names you might turn to is actually a non-Iranian. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and has been hailed as the finest translator of Persian poetry. That's right, my featured guest today, Dr. Dick Davis, is an award-winning British-born poet, university professor, translator, and leading scholar of Persian poetry, who's made it his lifelong mission to introduce Persian medieval poetry and literature to the Western world. Dr. Davis received his M.A. in English literature from Cambridge back in the 1960s. A strong desire to travel took him to the East. He moved to Tehran in 1970 and started teaching English at the University of Tehran. He met his life companion there and has collaborated with her in some of his translations. In the chaos of the revolutionary period in Iran, Dr. Davis returned with his wife to the UK in 1978 and set about obtaining his PhD in medieval Persian from Manchester University. In the UK, he taught at Durham and Newcastle, and after subsequently moving to the United States, he has taught at UCSB and at Ohio State University, where he was a professor of Persian and the chair of the Department of New Eastern Languages and Cultures. His books of translations include Borrowed Ware, Medieval Persian Epigrams, the Shahnameh, The Legend of Siavash, Rostam, Tales of Love and War from Persia's Book of Kings, and Faces of Love, Hafez and the Poets of Shiraz. And Dr. Davis's own poems about Iran include At Home and Far From Home, poems on Iran and Persian culture. And of course, he is famously the translator of the very popular landmark novel by Iraj Pezeshkzad, My Uncle Napoleon. And right now, Dr. Dick Davis joins me from Columbus, Ohio today. Hello, sir.
Hello. Thank you very much for that very generous introduction.
What a great pleasure and honor it is for me to speak to you. I can tell you that much of what I've read of Persian poetry and literature, I've read your words as much as I've read the author's words. So it's an honor. Thanks for doing this.
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking me.
By the way, you are in the Midwest, but I understand that you and your wife, Afkham, have found a fertile Persian community in Columbus, Ohio?
Yes, there's quite a nice Persian community in Columbus, Ohio, almost all our friends are Iranians, belonging to this local Iranian community, and we've been here for over 30 years. So it's quite we have a small circle who we see pretty well all the time. And most of them have been here for almost as long. So it's a well-established little community.
You still don't sound like an American Midwesterner. I guess you can take the boy out of Portsmouth, but...
Yes, you're right. It depends. You're right. When my mother's passed now, but when I used to go home to see her, she used to say to me, "Richard, you have an American accent." And I said, "Well, nobody in America thinks I have an American accent." I think it's a bit transatlantic now, mid-Atlantic now. It's sort of somewhere in between the two.
It's a very elegant, anyway. Let's put it that way. Dr. Davis, I want to ask you about the approach and the responsibilities of being a high-profile, world-renowned translator. But let me first ask you about your life journey, because I think it should be quite fascinating for people of Iranian descent to hear about how you fell in love with Iran and Persian culture. And let me start with a general question. As I intimated in the intro there, or said it directly, I should say, you've made it this mission to bring Persian literature and poetry to the Western world. Why?
Well, I went to Iran in 1970. I was 25 in 1970, so I was a young man. And through various events happening there and people I met and so forth, I really fell in love with the country and the culture. And I think I would have stayed indefinitely if the Islamic Revolution hadn't happened. And the reason I left was not especially because of the revolution. It was because the universities were closed, and so I wasn't getting a salary. So I didn't have anything to live off. So I and my wife, we married in 1974. I and my wife, we returned. We went to England, and I realized that I had begun to read Persian poetry then. I had a very good teacher in Iran. When I was an undergraduate, it was the medieval period I was most interested in. And even for somebody who knows almost nothing about Persian literature, which I was in that position when I went there in 1970. The fact that Iran had a great medieval literature, I knew that much, although I couldn't read any of it or just little bits in translation. And so, because I was interested in Western medieval literature, I thought I would try and read Persian medieval literature. And as I say, I was lucky to find a very good teacher. And so I started to read it, and I really did fall in love with it. One of the things that I noticed was that in many ways it's very similar to European medieval literature. There are many similarities, which we can talk about later if you like. But there are also, of course, major differences. And so this sense of familiarity and unfamiliarity together I found really intriguing. And Persian poetry, one of the things I've always liked about poetry, and this might seem very obvious to an Iranian, but it's not necessarily obvious to a Westerner, is that I like the beauty of the poetry. And beauty is, of course, people in the West, in Europe, they like poetry to be beautiful, but it's not often the major thing. It is in a place like Italy, for example, but not in England. English poetry doesn't particularly try to be beautiful. It tries to tell the truth. It tries to be accurate. It tries to sort of change things. It tries to be psychological, all sorts of things, and beautiful among them. But beautiful isn't first. And one of the things that I really loved about Persian poetry was the fact that it valued beauty so much, that beauty was so important in it. And that was something that I hadn't really come across in English literature, for example.
I mean, it's interesting because taking a few steps back, and if I can just pick up on a number of things along the way that you've just mentioned. First of all, you didn't come, as I understand it, you didn't come from a family of academics. You grew up in a town called Withersnea in Yorkshire in England, and you credit a teacher or a headmaster at your school for getting you interested in poetry in the first place. Did you have any exposure at all to Persian literature or poetry when you were a kid in Britain?
Well, not really. I mean, I read Fitzgerald's translation of Omar Khayyam, and that was about it. I mean, that's all that I knew. Of course, when I was young, I'm in my 70s now, but when I was young, which is, it's a long time ago, Fitzgerald's Omar Khayyam was still a book that you would see in most households that had any books. It was in a way, it's very strange. Obviously it's a translation, but in a way it was the most popular book of poetry that existed when it was published. It was published in 1859, and by the end of the 19th century, it was the best-selling book of poetry in all of England, of any kind of poet at all. And so that was in our house, because my family were not especially educated, but there were lots of books in the house, and that was there. But that was the only example I had of medieval poetry.
And I'm guessing you had this. Somebody would say Iran, and you had this sort of exotic impression of this place, this Eastern mystical place.
Yes, you're right. And of course, Fitzgerald's translation is a wonderful work in English, and it does convey quite a lot of what's in Khayyam, although it's, as many people have pointed out, it's not especially accurate. But Fitzgerald himself never went anywhere near Iran. He never went east of Paris. And so his notion of Iran was an entirely fanciful one. And so the Iran you get from his translations is it's a kind of romantic European version of Iran. It's not any kind of truth, in fact, but it's very charming.
So by the time you're at Cambridge, you're studying English medieval poetry.
That's right.
How does the boy from Portsmouth who grew up in Withersnea, who's at Cambridge studying English poetry, end up traveling to first Italy and then Iran by 1970?
Well, various things happened when I was a young man that meant that when I graduated from Cambridge, when I went down, I wanted to leave England. I wanted to get away. I wanted to sort of see the world a bit. Also, this was the 1960s, and it was very common for people to sort of take off for a while, especially Europeans, to take off and sort of go on a hippie trail or something like that. I didn't actually do that, but I was part of that general sort of get out and see the world feeling that there was in the 1960s, and it was much easier to do then than it is now, and it was much safer to do it then than it is now. And also, I mean, it was only 20 years since the Second World War was over, and Europe was being rebuilt, and it was very easy to get a job. It wasn't as if you went to a new country and you didn't know whether you'd get a job or not. It was very easy to do so. So first I went to Greece, and I had a very good time in Greece, but then there was the coup in Greece. So there was a fascist coup in 1967, so I left Greece. Then I went to Italy, and I had a great time in Italy, and I really, I almost, what Iran has become to me, it almost happened in Italy. But for one reason or another, it didn't. And then I had a friend who I had been an undergraduate with. We'd been together as students, and he's still one of my closest friends. And he was on an archaeological dig in Iran. This is in 1969, I think. And he wrote to me saying that he loved the country. It was so beautiful. He was having such a great time. And although he was there just for the summer to help on the dig, he wasn't an important archaeologist or anything. He was just somebody who'd gone to sort of do the amateur bit of digging things up and brushing things off and cataloguing things and that kind of thing. But he'd had such a wonderful time. He said, I'm going to stay in Iran and get a job teaching English for a year. Why don't you come? And you'll enjoy it, I know, because we had been in Italy together, and he knew how much I enjoyed Italy. And he said, you'll have a... So I did. So I went there. And I went there in theory for 2 years. I went with a 2-year contract. But by the time I was getting towards the end of the 2 years, I had met Afgham, who I finally married, and I wanted to stay. So when that 2-year contract was finished...
So hang on a second. These are pivotal years you're rushing through here.
That's right.
The first... Tell me about your first impressions when you get to Tehran, because I mean, the romantic version of this story is that you arrive in Iran and go, oh wow, and it fills your heart because you know that for the rest of your life you're going to be dedicating yourself to this place. Was it like that, or how did you feel when you first got there?
It wasn't quite like that, and of course I first got there to Tehran, which was, it was a modern city of the 1960s, especially if you were in the center of Tehran, which is where all the foreigners like me tended to be. To see anything that was remotely like a European might imagine Iran to be, you had to certainly leave Tehran, and you probably had to leave the cities altogether. And of course, at the beginning, I didn't do that. So it wasn't that foreign at the beginning. The main thing that was foreign was the language. And of course, there are cultural differences that you pick up. But I had lived in different cultures. I expected cultural differences, and they didn't particularly faze me. The thing that was crucial, the thing that sort of changed everything for me, was what sounded like something very negative, which is I got very ill. I had been in Iran. I went in September, I think, in 1970. And by 1971, I think February 1971, I was very ill. And I finished up in hospital. And there was a nurse there who I fell in love with, who is now my wife. And it was because of her that I stayed.
Wow.
And it was because of her that I started to get really serious about Iranian culture, because I really fell in love with her very strongly. It wasn't a, well, this will be interesting for a month kind of thing. It was, I want this for the rest of my life kind of thing.
Oh, I didn't know the nurse part. I didn't know that that's where you guys met. It's a bit the English Patient, isn't it?
It is the English Patient, actually. Yes, it's very similar. And of course, if I was going to, I knew quite soon that I wanted to marry Afgham. Afgham was much more cautious about this than I was. I mean, it took her quite a long time to say, well, yes, that's possible, perhaps in the future. But I knew that if it was going to happen, I knew enough about Iranian culture to know that she just couldn't take off and marry me. That I had to get to know her family. Her family had to accept me and all that. And I realized if I was going to do that, I had to really immerse myself in Persian culture, try and learn Persian, try and adapt to the kind of social customs of Iran in a way that I wouldn't have done if I hadn't have met Afgham. My stay in Iran would have been something like my stay in Italy. I'd have stayed for a couple of years and thought, that was a wonderful culture, now I go somewhere else. But because I met Afgham, I didn't go somewhere else. I stayed, and I started to learn Persian. And then my interest in medieval poetry, it was vaguely in the back of my head, well, there's a great poetry over here from the medieval period. Why don't I try and access it as far as I can? And I found a teacher, and I started to do that. And at that point, what with meeting Afgham and the poetry together, I by the end of 1971, I was hooked, and that's it. I thought this is where I want.
By the way, I understand her parents didn't care for you at first. How did you manage? How did you stick handle that?
Well, you're right. They didn't care for me at first, and I don't blame them really. I mean, I have daughters myself now, and I can see myself. When my daughters were in their early 20s, Afghan was 21 when I met her. I was 25. If some 25-year-old turned up on my doorstep to take away my 21-year-old daughter, and he was from a completely different country and he spoke a language that I didn't understand, I can well understand why Afghan's family were not terribly keen on me. And I certainly, in retrospect, don't blame them for it. In fact, Afghan's mother, quite early on, I think, she decided I was all right, and she worked on her husband, who... Why
on earth do you think she decided that?
I don't know. I really don't. Actually, Afghan's mother was she's passed now, but she was a tremendously warm, generous, kind woman. And I think she just, instead of seeing me as a foreigner, she just saw me as a young man who was interested in her daughter. And she tried to sort of weigh me up, whether I was sort of worth it, as it were, whether I would treat her well, whether if we were together, whether it might last or not. I think she sort of gave me the benefit of the doubt. Her husband, he had much more traditional views. Her husband was retired from the army, and like a lot of army people in Iran at that time, he had sort of, well. As you said, I translated my uncle Napoleon. He wasn't quite like Daejan, but he was along those lines in some ways. He really didn't trust the British at all. And of course, he lived through the Mossadegh crisis and all that. And when the British did not come out of it at all well, behaved very badly, in fact. And so he had rather a negative view of the British. And it took some time to wear them down. Took 3 years, in fact. But after 3 years, finally, he said, okay, well, if you want to get married, all right. So we did.
You get married in 1974 in Tehran.
That's right.
What was it like being an English teacher at Tehran University?
Actually, I didn't like it very much, to be honest. The classes were very sporadic and regimented. I didn't feel... I came with a group of people. There were about 8 of us or 10 of us, I think, all hired together. And they had hired 8 or 10 Americans at the same time to do exactly the same jobs. And then we found out, when we had been there only a few months, or even less than that, I think, that the Americans and the English were being paid completely different salaries to do exactly the same work. And in fact, the English were coming out of it better. We were being better paid than the Americans. Of course, the Americans were really furious about this. And so, foolishly...
Wow, the symbolism here, the imperialism, the two big cultures having at it,
exactly.
at their prey. Yes, I mean, this is very interesting.
Well, anyway, the Brits decided they would support the Americans, foolishly enough. So we went off all together and we said, look, we all have to be paid the same. And they said, right, you can all be paid what the Americans are paid, which meant that we were going to get a drop in salary. And there were various other problems with, and so when I stopped that job, and then I got a position teaching English in a small college in the north of Tehran. And that was very pleasant. It was much smaller. The staff were very nice. I had a good time there, and also I was able to teach some English literature too, because there were some students who knew English very well. So I could teach some Shakespeare and some British poetry, and I liked doing that, as well as just teaching the language. And so by the time I got there, I had a good time. I enjoyed that. But my experience of actually Tehran University was not very positive, unfortunately.
I mean, Dr. Davis, by the time the late 70s are coming, and of course 78, 79, the revolution is... we all know that students played a big role in that, at least in the forefront of demonstrations. And so you're teaching students. You must have had some awareness of the agitation that was coming. What was life like for you in the lead up to November 78 when you end up leaving?
It was, well, it didn't become very obvious until, say, the beginning of 78. By that, I mean, to a foreigner. By that time, it was fairly obvious that there were strong social undercurrents, and there was a possibility of major upheavals. Although almost to the very end, almost everybody believed this will blow over. That is, the Shah would not leave. Because there had been previous moments like this in the Shah's reign, in which they had in fact managed to neutralize the opposition. Right. And it was thought that this would happen again. But of course, I was teaching young people. Most of the young people were involved in some way or other in political. They all had political views, and a lot of them were active politically too. I can't remember exactly when it was. I think it was probably about April or May in 1978. Somebody in one of my classes obviously passed on something I had said. I was very careful what I said in class, but even so, something I had said was passed on to the secret police, and I was summoned and interrogated quite. I mean, I was frightened. I wasn't actually hurt physically at all.
Interrogated because they thought you might be a revolutionary of some kind?
Because somebody had said I was saying things that were derogatory about the government or something like that. Mm-hmm. They never actually told me what it was that I was supposed to have said. So it was difficult to defend myself because I didn't know what I was defending myself from. Anyway, they finally got me to sign a paper saying I would never do this again and that kind of thing, and they just let me go. But that was a bad day, but it didn't have repercussions. But later on, when the demonstrations started and there was the massacre in Meydan-e-Jaleh and all that, my wife and I were living on one of the main streets, which was then called Villa. I don't know what it's called now, which was a big, wide street. And it was wide enough for tanks, and there were tanks in the street, and there were soldiers, and there was occasional firing. And we had some friends, two people from India, who were good friends of ours, and they lived in a back street where tanks couldn't get down. It was very narrow. And they said, "Why don't you come and stay with us until all this blows over?" Because everybody thought it would blow over. So we stayed with them, and finally, we actually left Tehran from their flat. We never went back to our own apartment.
And how hard was it to leave in November of 78?
Well, we finally left by bus because it was impossible to leave by plane. It was very, very difficult to leave by plane. I had a student. One of my students worked at the airport, and he said that he would get us plane tickets and so forth. And I think he really meant to, but he was unable to. And we left by bus. And going by bus, it wasn't that difficult, but still, I think it was for some Iranians, but it wasn't for us.
How hard was it emotionally to leave? Is kind of where I was going.
It was very emotional. It was very, especially leaving Afkam's family. Afkam's mother was terribly upset. And her father was upset too, though he was much more kind of, he was an army man, he didn't show it so much, but I could see he was. And I think Afkam's mother wondered whether she'd ever see Afkam again. That was quite difficult parting from them. The main thing, the main kind of crisis or moment when things seem might go wrong for us in leaving Iran was that after Afkam and I married, Afkam was still working, and I was working too, and we were living off my salary and saving Afkam's salary. We had intended to buy an apartment in Tehran. Anyway, that's what we were doing, and we had quite a bit of money in the bank. It was, enough to buy a small apartment, something like that, which we had saved up. But then, just about when we wanted to leave, there was a kind of order came down from the government that no money could be exported from Iran, that no money could be sent out of Iran. And so we thought, well, we're going to lose it all. And I had a student, I said I had a student who worked at the airport. I had another student who worked at the National Bank, the Banque Meli. And he said to me, he was a very nice young man, and he said to me, I don't know if you trust me, but if you make a check out to me and give me the money, and give me your account in England. When you get to England, all your money will be there. And I said to Afghan, what do you think? She said, well, we're going to lose it anyway, so you might as well risk it. And I did exactly that. I gave him the check, and we got to England, and every single penny was there. God bless him. Yeah, I was very, very touched. And by that time, we had lost touch with him. I tried to get in touch with him to thank him, but things were so chaotic then. And
well, you know, it's interesting. I was thinking about you and this move. I mean, from what I understand of your story, you can clarify if I don't have this correct, but your serious academic study of Persian literature doesn't start until after you returned to England in '78, in the midst of that coming revolution in Iran. And I think about that, and I think, was that in a bizarre and perhaps in a macabre kind of way, was that a happy accident? Like, without the revolution, you might have been forever an English teacher in Tehran, but instead you become this academic and writer and translator of Persian literature?
Well, in a way, yes. I guess for us it was a happy accident. What happened was that, I had spent 8 years in Iran by then, and I hadn't been. I think I'd been back to England once in that 8 years, very briefly, and I had really, I'd become soaked in Persian culture and my wife's family and all that kind of stuff. And of course, we got to England, and none of it was there. I missed it, and Afghan, of course, missed it profoundly, I thought, I don't want to lose all this. Well, I've started to read this medieval poetry. I'll throw myself into that. And then another thing that had happened was that the very last class I had, the last year I was teaching, the students in that class, many of whom were very political, they were the students who used to tell me, there's going to be a demonstration, don't go down this street on that day, and that kind of thing. They were very nice, very friendly students. They gave me the complete edition of what was then the standard edition of the Shahnameh, which was called the Moscow edition. They gave me the Moscow edition of the Shahnameh in 9 volumes, as a goodbye present, which was terribly sweet of them. It was very nice of them. And I got back to England with the 9 volumes of the Shahnameh. And because I felt so nostalgic for them, because they were such, I thought, well, the least I can do is try and read it. So I started to read it. And of course...
Sorry, what language was it in?
It was all in Persian.
In Persian,
It was
because you haven't translated it yet.
I hadn't translated it.
Right. Your book hasn't come out yet. Yeah.
No. So I was reading it. I started to read it, and in fact, I said there were 9 volumes, and I really got hooked into it. There are things about starting with Ferdowsi that are good. One thing is that Ferdowsi has a relatively small vocabulary compared with many authors. At the moment, I'm translating a poem by Nizami, who has the most enormous vocabulary. So I've been working with this language for 40 years, and I'm still looking at words because of Nizami's using very obscure words. But Ferdowsi doesn't do that. He has a few obscure words, but in general, it's a small vocabulary, so you can get used to it fairly quickly. Also, Ferdowsi's writing is very clear. He means what he says, and he says what he means. And there's a kind of simple, strong nobility about it. I don't mean simple in a bad way, but it's strong and clear. And so it's not that hard to read as soon as you get used to the slightly archaic language. But it took me almost a year to read the first volume of the 9 volumes, but then the other 8 volumes I read in the next year. So I had sort of got into it by the time I ended the first volume. And it was reading the Shahnameh, I thought, I want to do this properly, academically. And I started to ask around to see if I could do a doctorate in medieval Persian. I was accepted at 2 places, Cambridge and Manchester. And Cambridge said, well, you can come, but you're on your own. And Manchester, they said, you can come and we'll give you money for 2 years. So I went to Manchester.
I was going to ask you about the Shahnameh because this is Ferdowsi's epic Book of Kings. You've done the translation of it. You've also written a book denoting its importance. In a nutshell, why is the Shahnameh? You've talked about the writing style, but why is it so vital, or is it so vital? Do you think that we should all be reading it?
Oh yes, let me digress for a moment. If you translate a work, obviously you get to know the work very well if you translate it. And I have found by translating works that by the end of doing it, by getting to the end of it, you either hate it and you really had enough of it, even if you started off rather admiring it, or your admiration for it has increased exponentially. And that's what happened for me with Ferdowsi. When you start to read Ferdowsi, it seems fairly simple. You think, is there much to this, or is it just a superficial story? But then you realize, and it's an extraordinarily profound and very wise disquisition on the nature of human life, on the nature of power, ambition, authority, heroism, cowardice, all those things. It's the most marvelous kind of panorama of the possibilities of being human, how you can be good and how people are evil. And one of the great themes that goes through the Shahnameh, goes through right from the beginning right to the end, is if you have a good man and he lives under an evil government, what should he do? And of course, I had just left Iran in the revolution, and that idea, what do you do when you hate the government? What do you do? Do you rise up against it? Do you try and tolerate it? Do you just leave? Do you wash your hands of it and just say, I don't care? What do you do? And the Shahnameh examines that problem over and over again. And it never really provides a solution. That's another great thing about the Shahnameh. I've realized as somebody, I've lived my whole life in literature. It's not just the literature of Iran, but the literature of other literatures that I know too. The really great works, they don't answer questions, they ask questions. The Shahnameh does that. You don't have easy answers at the end of the Shahnameh. You see that the problems of government, the problems of human relationships, the problems of father-son and husband-wife, all those relationships, that they are complicated and difficult, and that there are not simple answers to them. And you get that in Shakespeare too. Ferdowsi is easily comparable to Shakespeare. I mean, he's certainly as great an author as Shakespeare, if not greater. So my feeling for how do
you come to that? Not why is Ferdowsi as good as Shakespeare, but how do you even compare? Are you talking about the strength of storytelling or characters, or I mean, how do you, when you think about what you just said, what do you actually mean that Ferdowsi is as strong as Shakespeare?
Well, I would say the same of Nezami, but it's for completely different reasons. With Ferdowsi, what you have is you have a sense of the depth and complexity of life, and you have a strong sense of humane generosity towards different ways of living. You get that in Shakespeare. That is. The fact that the Shahnameh is so long is important. If you only read bits of it, you're only getting a bit of it. You're only getting a bit of what it says, because there is such variety in it. There's such richness in it, and you get all these different versions of how to live and what it is to be human, which Ferdowsi is every. I mean, he doesn't make the stories up. He gets the stories from elsewhere, but he uses the stories to examine the things he's interested in. Right. And it's clear that what he's interested in questions of conscience. What should the good man do? It's very, very strong. People always say the Shahnameh is an epic, and of course it is an epic. But the great thing about most epics is that your side has to win. And of course that's important in the Shahnameh too. The Iranians have to win. But the great heroes in the Shahnameh, they don't ask themselves, how do I win? They ask themselves, what must I do to be good? What is the ethically right thing to do?
It's Shakespearean also in the sense of, I mean, probably not just Shakespearean. This is probably a hallmark of great poetry. You tell me if it isn't. But the questions that are being asked are particularly time agnostic, right? It's not how do we win the war in 1940. It's big questions around humanity, morality, love that really are as relevant today as they would have been 2,000 years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely true. People say it as a cliche, if you want to understand Iranian culture, read the Shahnameh, but there's a lot of truth in it. I mean, a lot of what is in the Shahnameh, is still present in Iranian culture. I mean, despite the fact that many of the mullahs would like it not to be there, but it is still present in Iranian culture. As you say, it's time agnostic. It crosses time periods.
You know, when we talk about, I mean, I should remind people who are, because I suspect a certain audience will just know you for your great translations and not be as well versed in the fact that you're also a famous or an award-winning poet of English poetry yourself. And you've said that you learned how to write narrative poems by reading Persian narrative poetry. Can you describe first of all, what narrative poems are and how they might be more uniquely situated in Persian works?
Your question, I mean, they're wonderful questions, but each of them, I think, well, I've got 6 ways to answer that. Now, which one do I go for?
I'm sorry.
No, that's
first of all,
right.
let's try and define a narrative poem. I'm assuming it's a poem that tells a story. Is that
a poem that tells a story? Yes.
Don't all poems tell a story, or no? That's
not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, you get a short lyric. A poem by Hafez doesn't tell a story. A poem by Hafez examines a particular situation, but it doesn't tell a story. I mean, one of the things about Hafez's poetry, for example, is that if you look in different editions of Hafez, and especially if you look in different manuscripts of Hafez, you get the same lines in completely different orders. Within the poem, the lines are in different order. This means there isn't a progression through the poem. It isn't a story that's being told. It's the same situation which is being examined from different angles with each line, but it's the same thing. So that's a non-narrative poem. Hafez is not narrative.
Is that what makes Hafez so challenging? You said you always knew you couldn't do justice to Hafez, even though you've translated his works. Is that why is Hafez so challenging?
Hafez is challenging for a number of reasons. One of them is that his poems are extremely ambiguous. And this is what I believe anyway. I think they're deliberately ambiguous. It's not that there is one straight answer. It's another, what I was saying about great poetry doesn't give you answers. It asks questions, or it poses problems. A lot of people, when they read Hafez, they say it means this, and it doesn't mean that. My feeling about Hafez is that it deliberately means both. that many lines of Hafez and whole poems are ambiguous. They can be read in completely different ways. An obvious thing is a poem can be read as being about God, or it can be read as being about a human lover. That's a very obvious example. And people will say, well, it's really about God, or it's really about a human lover. But my feeling is that Hafez is deliberately writing it so that it can be about both, which is wonderful, but it makes it damn difficult to translate.
Yeah, I was just going to say, how do you even do that?
Yeah, well, bringing the ambiguity out is very difficult.
Yeah.
It's why I did hesitate a long time before I mean, my publisher kept saying, come on, Dick, we do a Hafez. And I hesitated for a long time because I even wrote a paper about how Hafez is impossible to translate.
Right. So let me. Sorry, I took us down the Hafez path,
okay.
but we were talking about narrative poems and how you learn to write narrative poems by reading Persian narrative poetry, and I thought that was an interesting thing that you once said that I wanted to pick up on. What was it about these Persian stories that you read that inspired you to be able to write them?
Well, the kind of poetry I started writing when I was a young man was what we would call lyric poetry. It's love poems and poems about little moments. It doesn't tell a story at all, and they're short poems. You know, they don't go on for pages and pages. They're 10 lines or 14 lines or 20 lines, something like that, and they describe a moment or an emotion or something particular, and that you know, when the poem ends, the story ends, as it were. There isn't. You don't feel what happens next because that's it. It's all there. Now, Persian medieval poetry, the poetry I started reading, reading sort of the poetry I really got into when I was at university studying Persian was the narrative poetry. It's poetry that tells a story, that takes a long time to describe something, and that goes into it in great depth. It doesn't give you, it doesn't say, I'm in love and this is what it's like to feel in love. It describes the situation from many aspects, and it's highly decorated too, in a way that most English poetry is not. Persian, as I said right at the beginning, Persian poetry is deliberately beautiful, or most of it is, in a way that most English poetry isn't. That sense of being able to examine a subject over a long course of over many lines, for example, and to tell a story. How do you get the story out? If you have a story, you have people in the story. How do you represent what the people are like? How do you establish that this person is like this person is like this, all the while writing in verse? That's not easy to do, and I learned to do it reading Persian narrative poetry. I really did. I had read English narrative poetry, but it's never really spoken to me. It's the short poems in English that I've always really loved. There are exceptions to that.
This is probably a tedious, if not stupid question, but how do you know if you are a narrative poet or you're a novelist? I mean, how do you make what's the difference? How would you determine the difference if you're the person writing?
Well, I mean it's very hard. I think I've noticed this about writers, that they always think that the thing they don't do is the really hard thing to do. And I know that most novelists say that it's much harder to write poetry than to write novels. I think it's much harder to write novels than to write poetry, because I've always written poetry. I have tried to write a couple of novels. They were dreadful, really awful, terrible. And I remember reading a novel. I mean, this is off the subject of Persian, but as you've asked, I remember reading a novel by Graham Greene. I think it was The Quiet American. And the opening chapter, I think, is 4 pages. It's very short. And in that 4 pages, he establishes 2 characters, what they like, their relationship, the whole social situation that they live in. And it happens in Vietnam. And one of the characters is an American, and one of them is a Vietnamese, and so there's also this feeling of cultural difference, and also there's a power difference between them, and all that. He establishes all this in 4 pages, and I read it sort of, and I thought I could never do that. So I thought, right, okay, novels are not for me. I'm going to stick with poetry. So that was my way of seeing that I wasn't a novelist, and I couldn't. I don't think there is another thing which actually tells against a poet, but probably the greatest poet in English, the greatest British poet in English of the 20th century is W.H. Auden, and somebody asked Auden if he'd ever thought of writing a novel. Auden was very witty. He was always putting himself down. He said, "Oh, no. If you write novels, you have to be interested in other people." Now, there's a real truth in that.
Right.
Poets, I'm not. I mean, I try. Obviously, I try and be interested in other people, but poets find it very difficult to get out of their own head. And I've noticed that about the poets I know. It's very difficult for them to sort of disengage themselves from their own sensibility. To be a good novelist, you have to be able to do that.
Part of the reason I asked this is because I find the terminology confusing. I always have, especially when it comes to Persian works. When I was younger, I would hear the Shahnameh described as a poem. And I remember the first time I saw the Shahnameh in book form, I was like, this is a poem? It's a fucking, it looks like Ulysses, right? How is this a poem? So, my idea of a poem was like something that you see on one page and there's a rhyme pattern or something, So I'm on a lifelong quest to try and figure out what these things are. But
Well, I mean, with medieval poetry, it's easy. A poem is something which has rhyme and meter. But with modern poetry, it's more complicated. And of course, my heart has always been in the medieval period. You mentioned my own poetry. My own poetry, by the standards of most people who write poetry now is extremely old-fashioned. I mean, it has rhyme, it has meter. It's not in free verse, and it was old-fashioned when I started. It's not as if I've outgrown the fashion. I sort of started middle-aged, as it were.
Well, speaking of old-fashioned, I mean, the choice of translating a modern work like My Uncle Napoleon really stands out in your canon. It's certainly not a work of medieval Persian poetry, but it was wildly popular and very influential and important, I would say, in the modern works of Iranian writers. What attracted you to taking on that gig?
Well, it was a number of things. One was my wife and I, Afkham and I, we came to England. We came to England when the revolution was really sort of getting going. And there was a lot of optimism in Iran and a lot of optimism outside Iran. But then the revolution started to go sour. They started executing people from the previous government. I remember the execution of Hoveyda, who was the Shah's, not the Shah's last prime minister, but he was the major. There were a couple after Hoveyda, but he was the big prime minister for most of the time I was there. And Hoveyda was, I mean, he may have had his faults, but he certainly wasn't an evil person. He certainly didn't deserve to be shot like that. That was when I changed about the revolution, the execution of Hoveyda. But also, and then there was the American hostage crisis,
yes.
And Iran became a place which was totally vilified in the West.
Yes.
I mean, it hasn't changed that much now, although it's better now than it was then. It was seen as a place of sort of dour theological barbarism.
Yes.
And that was not the Iran I knew at all. I mean, my Iran had been utterly different from that. My Iran had been a welcoming, humane, kind, generous place where I had been very well treated and I'd had a wonderful time, and I felt. And Uncle Napoleon, I mean, the characters in Uncle Napoleon, they're very, very Iranian, but they're very, very human too, and they're not at all like the caricature of Iran that was going around after the revolution. And so one of the reasons I wanted to I thought I'd try and translate Uncle Napoleon was just that it shows such a humane and funny and charming and welcoming version of Iranian society, and the people in it, they're recognizable people that you can find in any society. I mean, the person like Asadollah Mirza, for example, and all of them, the whole lot. Aziz al-Sultani, there are lots of English Aziz al-Sultanis. So it was the humanity of it and also the humor. Humor was not something that was associated with Iran in the West at that time at all. And also the earthiness. It was seen as a place that had been taken over by a kind of crazy spirituality, which discounted all the kind of earthy side of life. Well, my Uncle Napoleon Daejan is very earthy. So one reason was I wanted to show that Iran was not like, or it wasn't only like, what all the propaganda in the West was saying.
Right, undermine some stereotypes, yes.
Sure, undermine some stereotypes.
What were the other reasons?
The other reason was that I had never translated a novel, and I wanted to see if I could do it. It was a test for myself. Also, I saw that you can say there are two kinds of humor. There's in novels. There's situational humor, which is humor which is based on characters and incidents and things like that. And then there's linguistic humor, which is based on language. And a lot of the humor in Uncle Napoleon, there's a lot of situational humor, and the whole basis of it is situational.
Yes.
But there's a lot of linguistic humor. There's a lot of humor which is based on the way characters speak, the different kind of social levels that they speak at, the way that Asadollah Mirza, for example, talks about sex, all that kind of thing. There's a lot of and then there's the servant Mashqasem, who speaks this kind of rural working class Persian, and I thought, am I going to be able to convey all those differences and I just wanted to see if I could do it. It was really a test for myself, and as I got into it, I loved it more and more, and I thought, well, I might not be doing this very well, but I'm having a great time. So I did it. I finished it.
It is it's such a great pleasure to get to talk to you. I want to end off with a couple questions about being a translator, and maybe I can start with segue out of My Uncle Napoleon, because that's a case where, at least when you, sadly he's passed now, but when you wrote, when you did the translation, Iraj Pezekzad was still alive. And in that case, I mean, obviously you can't consult with Ferdowsi when you translate the Shahnameh, but in that case, do you speak to the author? Do you check in with him, or do you show translations, or is it just sort of does the publisher or the author kind of give their blessing and then you're off to the races by yourself?
I've got a funny story about that. When I started to I did a couple of chapters, and then major publishers said they would publish it if I did the whole thing. So I thought, well, I'd better get Pezekzad's permission. So I wrote to him, and I got this postcard back, in which basically the postcard was in Persian. He gave me two conditions. One was I had to finish it in 2 years, and if I hadn't finished it in 2 years, he withdrew the permission. And that was, I found out later, it was because that somebody had offered to translate it into French and done half of it and then given up. And he had turned other people away who wanted to translate it, and then nobody wanted to do it. And so he was angry about that, which was very understandable. Mm-hmm. And the other one was that I would send him my versions every chapter by chapter. I would send it to him to review. And he would send back a card saying, yes, it's fine, keep going, yes, it's lovely, keep going. And I got all these cards back. And then after a while, I thought, well, I'll send him 3 or 4 chapters, because he hadn't so far made any negative criticisms. And then much later, I found out that his Pezekzad's European language was French. He spoke French perfectly, but he really didn't know English very well.
Right. Yeah, he was in Paris. Yeah.
Yes, he was in Paris, and he couldn't really understand my translation. I mean, so his saying that, I want to see it, it was a way of saying to me, you make sure you do it properly, because I'm going to check it.
Right.
But he couldn't actually check it. It was a kind of
Right.
joke. It was a joke very much in the spirit of his book. In fact, he was keeping me to something by conning me a little bit.
That raises that's as I say, a good segue, because I've really wanted to ask you. I'm always fascinated when it comes to translators, especially translators. I mean, this is a particularly amped up case with you, because you're translating major works, historic classic works, and you're the preeminent, as the Washington Post says, or whatever, the preeminent translator of these Persian works, which is fabulous. And at the same time, I would suspect it means that there's a lot of responsibility for you. In other words, when I'm reading the Shahnameh or My Uncle Napoleon, translated by Dr. Dick Davis, I'm reading your interpretation of these works.
Sure. Yeah.
And I've got to imagine it's a little bit like when I asked you a question earlier and you said, I'm thinking of 6 different ways I can answer that. It's probably something like that when you first read the poem, right? You sort of think, well, what are the 6 different ways I can do this? And so how do you know if you're getting it right?
Well, you don't. This is the short answer. You do your best. I mean, when I was applying to do my PhD at Manchester, I went up there and I talked to the person who would be my my supervisor, my director of studies, and he said, "Why do you want to do this?" And I said, perhaps your listeners won't recognize the reference, so I'll explain it. I said, I would like to be the Arthur Waley of Persian literature. Now, Arthur Waley was a person who lived in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and he translated the major works of Japanese and Chinese literature into English, which were not known in the West at all. And I mean, a lot of people criticize his translations now. They say, they're not that good, better ones have been done and so forth. But the thing was, he made the West aware of that literature in a way that it hadn't been before. And I was very conscious that English-speaking society was just not aware of this wonderful stuff that there was in Iran. And I at least wanted to make them aware in the way that Arthur Waley had done. Of course, I wanted to do the translations as well as I could. But even if they were bad translations, if they were out there, people would say, there is a great epic poem in Persian, or there is a great love story, or there is a great Sufi allegory, just to put these things on the map in the West, in the way that Arthur Waley had done for Japanese and Chinese culture, especially Japanese, but also Chinese. And Asaway was a much greater scholar than I am, and I'm not comparing myself at all, but I wanted to do a similar kind of thing, and that's what I tried to do. In terms of responsibility, well, as I say, you do your best. If I can tell there's a story in the Shahnameh which I've often used to illustrate what I think a translator should be.
Okay.
The story is it's quite late in the Shahnameh. It's in the Sasanian part of the poem, after Alexander the Great, just before the Arabs come. It's the reign of Khosrow Parviz, and there's a musician called Barbad. And Barbad hopes that he can be a court musician, but all the musicians who are already there at the court, they're jealous of him, so they keep him away from the court, so the king never hears him play. And he's very despondent. And then he meets a gardener, one of the king's gardeners, and the gardener says, "Look, I'll hide you in a tree. And when the king comes, I know that the king's going to sit in a particular place in the evening and drink his wine there, and sort of there'll be an entertainment. And you be in the tree and you play. And you'll be hidden in the tree." And that's what he does. And he plays he plays and sings. And the king, of course, can't see him. And he says, "What is that? What is that marvelous thing?" And now when I wrote about this, I said, what the translator ideally is like Barbad. He should hide himself in the tree. Barbad has this. He knows these songs, which are ancient songs, and now he sings them, and he makes them present for the king. He brings them into the present, and he brings them to this particular audience. That's what a translator should do. But Barbad has hidden himself. He doesn't push himself forward. The king can't see him. On the other hand, in order to sing the songs at all, Barbad has to use his voice. So although you hide yourself as a translator, you have to use your own voice. And that's the tricky thing. By using your own voice, you're revealing yourself. But I really have tried to keep myself out of my translations as much as I can, but it's impossible. You're there in the translation, and you can see this. I mean, for example, Homer in Western epic, Homer's been translated into English virtually every generation. So there's tens, if not hundreds, of versions of Homer, and everyone is different. They're all different from each other because they're written at different times by different people with different sensibilities, with different interests, different vocabularies, and so forth. And your own voice is there, no matter how much you want to get rid of it. The other thing I've tried to do is I only translate works that I really admire and really love, and I want to do justice to the author. I do this when I translate. I imagine the author watching me, and the author, and I think, can I say this? No, he won't like that. I can't say that.
I have a sort of analogy that let me try it on you, and to you see if this works for you in terms of helping me understand how you see your role. And that is, I wonder how important translating, meaning transferring, demonstrating tone is to this. Obviously, we can understand the dynamics of translating words, but the effort to translate tone. So for me, the analogy would be there's a Bob Dylan song that Bob Dylan has written, and he's singing. And you're going to cover the song in Persian or whatever. Maybe let's say even you're just going to cover the song in English. Are you trying to sound like Bob Dylan, who has a particular twang and way that he sings, or are you trying to commute? Are you trying to leave the listener with the impression of how they would feel if they're listening to this Bob Dylan song?
Well, in translating. To answer your question in a roundabout way, really, I'm trying to do the latter. When I translate something, and of course, it's a question of part scholarship, part imagination, mostly imagination, with as much scholarship as one has. But I ask myself. Sorry, I'm jumping around. But the first thing about translating is you're not translating words; you're translating meanings. And this is very important, because if you translate word for word, it's going to sound rubbishy. You can't do that. You have to say to yourself, what does the line mean? And it's the meaning you put into English, not the words. A very obvious thing is translating Daejeon, for example, the insults, like pedasukte. If you translate that literally into English, it's ridiculous. It doesn't mean anything.
Father is burned, or something.
So you've got to translate the meaning, not the words. Right. And that's true altogether. And what I ask myself is, I want to put the meaning into English so that the reader is going to feel something as close as I can get it, and it's obviously not that close, as close as I can get it to what I think an original reader of Ferdowsi or Nizami or Attar would feel when he read the poem. What would an Iranian feel when he first heard Ferdowsi? Now, my language is not Ferdowsi's language. It's not nearly as noble. It's not nearly as strong. But I want to get as close as I can to it so that the English reader gets something of what it's like to be a Persian reading an Iranian reading the Persian. That's what I want to do.
The feel of the Bob Dylan song.
The feel of it, yes, you get the feel of it. Yes, that's it.
Well, he didn't love my analogy. I noticed you skated away from the Bob Dylan, but I, but it works for me.
You only skated away from it because you're talking about English and English.
Yes,
and it's a different thing when you're doing it to
you're right.
Yeah.
Although some would argue that Bob Dylan doesn't really sing in English, so
there's that too. Yes,
it sort of works. I wonder about in this era of sensitivity around cultural appropriation. Like if I know the Iranian community around the world, I can only imagine that everyone is quite grateful to have this guy this eminent scholar who grew up in Britain, came to Iran, loved the culture, and is now in America, does these translations. It almost feels like you're honoring the culture. But has it ever, have you ever had the opposite reaction? Has anybody sort of gone, who are you to do this? This should be done by an Iranian. Have you ever faced that?
Oh yes, I have. I mean, the people being nice about the translations is far more common than the opposite. But I have received the opposite. I mean, particularly when I started out, I would get people who more or less said, "Who the hell do you think you are to be doing this?" But that wasn't common, but it did happen. I mean, it did happen occasionally. Also, I would say that I was working on a particular poem, and this person who I could see didn't really know the poem. He knew the poem by reputation. He would explain to me what the poem was about. And I thought, look, I really know this poem backwards. I'm not interested in, that kind of thing. But mostly people have been very generous. Most Iranians have been more generous than I deserve, I feel. I'm very grateful to the way the Iranian community has accepted my translations.
You're really one of the greats. And let me just finish off with a general question, if you'll indulge me with this one, which is let me go super general. Why do you think? My feeling is that there continues to be an interest in Persian poetry and literature. I would say even an increase in the sort of canonizing of, say, Rumi, for example, in Western pop culture in recent years. What do you attribute that to?
Rumi is a particular case, Almost all, now there are major exceptions to what I'm going to say, but almost all the Rumi which is available in English is not Rumi. It's not even remotely Rumi. It's
What do you mean?
It's most of the people who quotation marks have translated Rumi. They don't know Persian, what they're doing is they're taking an idea in a poem and they're writing their own poem, and that's fine. But don't pretend it's Rumi. Now there are major exceptions to that. I mean, the translation there's a translation of the Masnavi which is going on at the moment by a guy called Javid Mojaddedi. And that's a wonderful translation, and it's beautifully done, and it really is Rumi. And there are other very good translations too. But a lot of what people think of as Rumi is in fact it's the translator's own poems. It's very, very. I mean, it's so far from the original poems that you can't tell what poem's being translated. You can't tell which poem of Rumi it's supposed to be, because the English is so far away. So Rumi is a special case. And some translations of Hafez are like that too. I mean, I could give you a couple of names, but I won't. It's not fair. But I don't know. We do live in a world in which cultures, just because of communications and radio and instant communication from one side of and telephones and everything from one side of the globe to the other, everybody is very conscious of other cultures, and most people who are not sort of parochially stupid and think that, oh, my culture is the only interesting culture. And of course, there are people like that in every damn culture, that they think that my culture is the best and I'm not interested in anything else. But most people who aren't like that, and I hope that is most people, in fact, they're interested in other cultures. They want to know what other cultures are like. One can only, I mean, there are so many cultures, there's so much literature, one can only do so much. But I felt that there's enough in Persian poetry which I loved, that there was enough there that I could show other people that it was worth loving too. That's what I wanted to do. But I want people when they read my Ferdowsi to feel, obviously they're reading my Ferdowsi, they're reading English, but I don't want them to feel they're just reading Dick Davis. I want them to feel that they're getting something of what Ferdowsi is, not just me, but the actual Ferdowsi or Attar or whoever it is.
Do you agree that it feels like there's a growing interest in Persian works, or is that wishful thinking on my part?
There is, but it's gradual. And I mean, I've talked about this many times, especially with my publisher, that Persian literature is still majorly underrated. It's still not seen as the truly great literature as it is. There are many great literatures in the world, and I hate this kind of, this literature is better than that kind of thing. Every literature is wonderful according to its own standards, and the standards are different in different literatures. So by English standards, English literature is the best, but by Persian standards, Persian literature is the best, and so on for Italian and all the others too. But by any criterion, by any way of measuring, Persian has a major literature, a great literature. One thing you can say is that in different cultures at different times, most of the sort of artistic energy seems to go into one art form. Like you get an awful lot of wonderful painters in the Renaissance in Italy, and then you get an awful lot of wonderful composers in Germany in the late 18th and 19th centuries. But now in Iran, that in the Middle Ages, that energy, that wonderful artistic energy, it went into lots of different forms too, but it mainly went into poetry. That's where the real genius of Iran went. And it went on for a long time. If you think of the major period of British literature, it's from about 1560 to 1700. It's 150 years, something like that. The major period of Iranian literature, it lasts from the 11th century to the 15th century. It's a long period, and there's a lot of great poetry in there, not just a few great poems, many, many great poems. And most of them still don't have the recognition in the West that they deserve.
Dr. Dick Davis, what a great pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks for the education. Thanks for the enthusiasm. And I can only be grateful for this hour and plus that we've spent together. Thank you for this.
Well, thank you very much for asking me. I've enjoyed talking about it. I'm always ready to talk about Persian poetry and get people to try and read it.
I hope we'll do it again soon. Talk to you soon. Thank you again, and hello to your wife and the Persian community in Columbus, Ohio.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cheers.
I've enjoyed doing it. Thanks for asking me.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Dr. Dick Davis, an award-winning British-born poet, university professor, translator, leading scholar of Persian literature, who has made it his lifelong mission to introduce Persian medieval poetry and literature to the Western world. We reached Dr. Dick Davis in Columbus, Ohio today. I could have done that for... I could have talked to him for another 5 hours.
Really, it was beautiful. It was fun.
What a beautiful sounding voice he has. Yeah. I almost want to put his voice to a soundtrack. Yeah. And the insights about Persian poetry. Did you know all of that stuff?
Actually, what he said about the Hafiz translation, actually, it blew me away. Like,
which part of it?
The ambiguity in his poetry, which is right. It's always I have this issue to translate Hafiz poetry to non-Persian. It's really hard because you cannot translate the ambiguity.
And how you don't, when I asked him how do you know you've got it right, and he said you don't. It's really that the responsibility of the translator. It's fascinating, and that his work as an English poet was informed by Persian poetry. It's such a beautiful message, and his whole story. I mean, you know the English Patient reference, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that he goes to Iran, falls in love with his nurse when he's critically ill, and the rest is history.
Yes, it's amazing.
He's you know, we often say sometimes we say things like this, but here's a person who did not grow up Iranian, who seems to have more of an appreciation and an understanding of Persian culture and Persian creativity and arts than many Iranians.
Yes,
it's just it's very inspiring. What an inspiring man.
And I like the metaphor analogy of the Bob Dylan.
The Bob Dylan? I'm not sure he liked it.
No.
It worked for me. Yeah. Because they're not, it's true. It's not, it's not exactly cover songs. It doesn't work in the exact same way, but I stand by my metaphor. Thank you, Shahjahan. Thank you to everybody. This is Full Time for Roqe today. Our website for all things Roqe related, roqemedia.com, ROQE media.com, where you can find all of our programs. Roqe Moments Funnies video. All of our video is there too. roqemedia.com. You can support us there too by becoming a patron. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together. Savvy Rohan, talented Anahita, the fabulous Keon, Super Patty Saw, Smart Pega, Alay Mertad, Captain Reza, and Groovy Shaya. Thank you to all of you out there for supporting us and sharing our content. Please subscribe if you've not done so already. Stay tuned for Talking to Persians London coming up in a couple of weeks. We're looking forward to you. Looking forward to seeing it. Find me on Instagram at Jian Ghomeshi. Mizun Bashin.